Hi guys. Tonight we step away from the comfort of your soft bed and warm blanket, and instead we walk slowly down a cold, stone staircase that seems to descend forever into shadow. The air grows heavy as you move lower, each step echoing with a hollow note that makes your skin prickle. The walls close in, dripping with condensation, and you can already feel the chill clawing at your lungs. You probably won't survive this, but don't worry, we'll take the journey together. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, share your location and the local time in the comments. I'd love to know where in the world you are, and whether it's the middle of your night or just a sleepy afternoon nap. Now, dim the lights, let the dark embrace you, and follow me down into the dungeon. Your foot scrapes on stone that is uneven, worn by centuries of feet most unwilling, dragged by force, their ankles bound in iron. The stairwell is narrow, steep, and slick. You trail your hand along the wall, only to feel the roughness of moss and the ooze of damp. Somewhere above, faint laughter drifts from the great hall, distant and cruelly cheerful, reminding you how far you've fallen from firelit comfort. It's astonishing to realize that beneath medieval castles, a second world existed, one of silence, misery, and cold stone. Historians still argue whether every castle actually had its own dungeon, or if many so-called dungeons were later inventions of Victorian imagination. Yet the reality remains. Subterranean spaces were used, and they were rarely pleasant. The cold strikes you first. You exhale, and your breath fogs instantly, drifting like a ghost. Each inhalation burns, as though winter itself has crawled inside your chest. In Northern Europe, particularly in England and Germany, some castle prisons were carved directly into bedrock. Without fireplaces, without sunlight, they became natural refrigerators, keeping the air perpetually near freezing. Imagine descending into such a place on a January night. There's no chance to grow used to it. The chill sinks in at once, wrapping your bones like an iron shroud. And then, the sound footsteps echo strangely in stone stairwells. One moment they're near, the next they stretch away into a ghostly distance. You listen, but you cannot tell whether it's your own steps or someone following you. Candlelight flutters and threatens to die in the drafts. The medieval builders never cared for comfort here. These were spaces of control, intimidation, or mere storage. Some scholars argue that donjons, meaning great towers, were mistranslated as dungeons, feeding the legend. But whether or not every dark pit was intended as a prison, many men and women still found themselves shackled inside them. As you reach the bottom, the smell hits you, a mixture of wet earth, rusted metal, and mildew thick as wool. The air feels heavy, unmoving. You taste the stone itself, sharp and mineral on your tongue. The walls are slick, and your shoes scrape against the steps. This descent is not just physical, but psychological. You're stepping into a place designed to strip away humanity. Up above, nobles dine on roasted venison, while down here you lose track of day and night. You pause on the final step, and the silence becomes unbearable. Not the silence of peace, but of waiting. A silence broken occasionally by a drop of water, hitting stone with an echo so sharp it feels like a heartbeat outside your own chest. There's no comfort here, no warmth, no reassurance. Just the anticipation of what might await you in the cell. And yet, even in these darkest spaces, human traces remain. Carvings scratched into the walls, sometimes names, sometimes prayers. In the Tower of London, graffiti from prisoners still survives, desperate pleas to God, or proud statements of loyalty to causes now long forgotten. One quirky detail often overlooked is that some prisoners carved elaborate coats of arms or even chessboards into the stone, as if to leave a mark of identity, or to keep their minds occupied in endless darkness. Think about it. A man condemned to die, chiseling out a chessboard by the light of a guttering torch, holding on to the rules of a game while the world outside moved on without him. Your skin prickles as you imagine pressing deeper. You wonder, was this stairwell meant as a passage for supplies, later repurposed to cage human bodies? Historians still debate whether many of these so-called dungeons were ever intended for long-term imprisonment, or if their use shifted with time. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between, sometimes storage, sometimes solitary confinement, and sometimes nothing more than a legend that kept people obedient through fear. But tonight, you have no choice. You've already descended, and the dungeon has closed around you. The cold stone is not just underfoot, it's in your lungs, your blood, your marrow. And as the last glimmer of daylight fades behind the stairwell door, you realize just how far you are from warmth, from safety, from survival. The first breath you take at the bottom is heavier than you expect. It carries the flavor of decay, of time, of secrets that have been trapped in this air for centuries. The walls ooze with a damp sheen, slick to the touch, and the smell of mildew seems to wrap itself around your nostrils. You wrinkle your face instinctively, but the stench follows anyway. It's not just mold, it's straw rotting after weeks of being soaked. It's sweat clinging to the memory of bodies long gone, and it's the faint copper tang of rust from iron that never dries. Your lungs draw it in, whether you want them to or not. Your eyes wander across the rough stone, trying to make sense of the gloom. A torch flickers far away, its flame swallowed by the cavernous shadows. Without fresh air circulation, smoke lingers thickly, making the darkness itself taste bitter. You shift uneasily, the soles of your shoes sticking slightly to the slime that grows in corners where water pools. Historians still argue whether such conditions were standard in medieval prisons or whether some accounts are exaggerations crafted by later storytellers. And yet, when archaeologists uncover cellars lined with blackened straw and streaks of soot, it's hard not to picture precisely this scene. A shiver runs through you, not from cold this time, but from the reminder that you are entering a space designed to erase individuality. You know this isn't a modern jail where rules are codified, where prisoners are entitled to blankets and meals with measured calories. This is a holding pit. If you last a day here, it's not because the dungeon was merciful, it's because your body is stubborn. The mildew clings not just to the walls, but also to your clothes. Within minutes, your fabric feels damp, and a chill slithers between your shoulder blades. If you had a cloak, it would be soaked by morning, and if you think you might get used to the odor, you won't. One quirky fact noted by some chroniclers is that medieval guards occasionally burned herbs like rosemary or juniper at the dungeon entrance not to comfort prisoners, but to mask the overpowering stench when nobles passed nearby. Imagine the irony of someone lighting fragrant branches, not for health, but so that lords feasting upstairs wouldn't gag at the smell rising from beneath their halls. You take another cautious step forward and notice how sound behaves here. Each drip, each shuffle expands into an echo chamber, filling every corner. When you cough, it doesn't leave you. It circles back, a ghostly version of your own voice. The damp air amplifies the smallest noises, which means you're never truly certain if you're alone. Is that the shuffle of your boot, or something else shifting in the straw? You might wonder if every dungeon smelled like this. Some scholars claim that certain castle prisons were dry, ventilated, and less horrific, used mainly to house important captives in tolerable conditions. But others insist that the worst accounts air so foul you faint, straw turning black with mold, buckets never emptied are not exaggerations at all. The truth probably varied by place and by prisoner. A noble hostage might get fresh bedding. A thief, though? He would rot in the mildew and pray for release. You can feel it working on your senses already. The odor dulls your appetite. Your head grows heavy, as though the musty air itself carries a weight. Your skin tingles with the suspicion of crawling things, whether they're real or just the trick of suggestion. You can almost hear a faint scratching in the straw. You shake it off, but the sound lingers. Above all, the mildew doesn't just stay in the dungeon, it follows. If you ever made it out, your clothes would carry the smell for days. Chroniclers wrote that even after release, prisoners were marked by odor alone, their bodies steeped in the dungeon's rot. Think about that. Freedom won't wash away the dungeon's grip. It stains you invisibly, clinging to every fiber of your being. And so, standing in that first moment, surrounded by mildew, rot, and damp stone, you realize you're breathing history itself, though not the kind preserved in books. This is the living, stinking memory of suffering, trapped in the very air. And there's no escaping it, not for as long as you stay down here. The air feels denser as you shuffle farther into the gloom, and then you notice the first thing that truly tells you this isn't just an empty cellar: the chains. They hang along the wall, each iron loop as thick as your thumb, each ring biting into the stone where it has been hammered in centuries ago. You brush a fingertip across one, and the rust comes away as a fine red powder, staining your skin. It is the color of dried blood, though you know it is only oxidation. Still, in this place, your imagination betrays you. You picture wrists worn raw, ankles rubbed to the bone, and bodies left to sag under the unyielding grip of metal. There is no comfort in these shackles. They are not meant to restrain gently, as in some modern police cell where padded cuffs and rights are afforded. Here, the iron cuts, the iron bruises, the iron scars. And perhaps that is the point. Punishment in the Middle Ages often emphasized humiliation and pain as much as containment. Records from the 13th century detail prisoners shackled not just to stop them escaping, but to remind them, and everyone else, of their powerlessness. When you lean closer, you hear the faint creak of metal shifting with your breath. These chains are heavy enough that a grown man could not lift them for long. One curious note that has survived in old castle inventories is that some lords took pride in displaying their iron restraints as symbols of authority. In fact, in one English fortress, the blacksmith's bill survives in the archives, listing 3 pairs of iron fetters, strong and unyielding, as if they were luxury purchases. It seems strange now, but to the medieval mind, the ability to imprison was itself a badge of prestige. You run your hand down the wall, tracing where multiple shackles have been placed at different heights. That detail whispers something chilling. They were meant for more than one person. Imagine the closeness, shoulders brushing against strangers, all of you chained like livestock, the smell, the heat of other bodies, the rasp of iron when anyone shifted slightly. The dungeon was never private, and in such conditions, even whispers of fear would spread like fever. Yet not every historian agrees on how widely such restraints were used. Some argue that many castle basements later labelled dungeons were originally wine storage rooms, where iron loops may have held barrels in place rather than wrists. It is difficult to know for sure, because time erases intent. A ring in stone could be for casks of ale or for human arms. The evidence leaves experts divided, and you are left alone to imagine the worst. What cannot be doubted is the physical toll of these chains. Try standing with your arms stretched overhead for more than a few minutes, and you will feel blood drain from your fingers, numbness creeping in. Now imagine hours or days. Chroniclers mention prisoners collapsing when finally released, their muscles unable to function. Some even describe hands turning black, where circulation had been cut off too long. Whether these tales were embellished or not, the reality of sustained confinement in iron needs little exaggeration. It is agony. And then there is the silence that follows when you realize how close you are to these instruments. The iron is not just an artifact, it is a voice from the past. You can almost hear it clank as a guard slams the shackle shut. Smell the hot breath of someone begging as the lock clicks. One odd anecdote preserved in a French text describes a jailer who claimed he could identify prisoners blindfolded simply by the sound of their chains, because each set rattled in its own distinctive way. Strange as it sounds, you almost believe him, because standing here, you already know the sound will haunt you. Your fingers twitch as you imagine being trapped in one of those rings. The iron is icy at first, but with time it would grow warm with your blood and sweat, leaving stains on both metal and skin. Even now, centuries later, the rust feels almost alive. You wipe your hand on your clothes, but the red smear remains, stubborn, refusing to let go. Perhaps that is the truest metaphor of all. The dungeon leaves marks whether you ever wore its chains or not. You step back and look again at the row of restraints. Were they truly used as often as folklore insists? Or do we project nightmares onto old iron? Scholars continue to publish papers, debating how many people were ever chained in such places, or whether most captives were simply locked in rooms without bonds. But standing here, in the damp, echoing cold, you realize the academic debate is less important than the human truth. Even one man shackled here was one too many. And so you imagine yourself sinking down against the wall, the iron fastened around your wrists. At first you think you could endure it, that perhaps you are stronger than the legends suggest. But after a short time, the cold creeps up your arms, the weight drags on your joints, and your body begins to shake uncontrollably. A day? You wouldn't last an hour before pleading, before breaking, before surrendering. And the chains would not care, because iron has no mercy. The dungeon does not need to shout to terrify you. Its quiet presence, the simple rusting of shackles against ancient stone, speaks louder than any scream. This is not just history, it is a lesson written in iron. Still here, still cold, still waiting. The cold creeps deeper, not just from the stone but from an unseen source. You pause and notice it, a steady draft of air that feels like knives brushing across your skin. It does not rise from beneath your feet. It slides in sideways, seeping through cracks in the wall and around the wooden door. Some castle prisons were deliberately designed with narrow slits or vents that opened toward the outside world, not to comfort prisoners but to keep the air circulating just enough that the space would not suffocate. And yet, in winter, those same vents became torture in themselves, funneling the bitter chill directly into the chamber. You draw your cloak tighter, not that it matters much. The wind seems alive, hunting for weaknesses, finding every gap in your clothing. You shiver and exhale, and your breath turns visible again, curling into the damp air. Chronicles from northern Europe often mention prisoners who froze to death in their cells, not from neglect but from deliberate cruelty. It was easier for jailers to let the weather punish than to waste energy on whips. A common fact in medieval record-keeping is that prisoners were cheaper dead than alive. Keeping them fed and warm required resources, while letting cold claim them was free. As you stand in the dark, you notice how the draft plays tricks. A faint whistle sings through the vent, almost like a human sigh. You tilt your head, unsure if you hear the wind or another prisoner's breath. In dungeons under castles such as Chillon in Switzerland, visitors today still report hearing eerie noises when air rushes through the old arrow slits. The architecture itself creates ghostly sounds, and you, in your fragile state, interpret them as something supernatural. There is, however, an odd detail to these vents. In some cases, they doubled as spy holes for guards. A jailer could peer through, unseen, and watch the captive shiver in misery. In certain accounts, guards even used the openings to toss in buckets of water, ensuring the floor stayed perpetually wet. Imagine being trapped while knowing someone, unseen, could be watching every tremor, every twitch of your cold-struck body. The lack of privacy gnaws at your mind almost as much as the cold does at your flesh. You crouch and try to block the draft with your body, but the stone radiates its own chill. No amount of curling into yourself will erase it. The dungeon is a refrigerator with no escape. In some places, especially in Poland and Germany, prisoners were forced to endure winters where temperatures dipped below freezing indoors. Archaeological digs have uncovered bones, with joints showing damage consistent with long-term exposure to extreme cold, hinting at frostbite endured before death. And still, scholars disagree on how widespread this practice was. Some argue that many castles lacked underground chambers entirely, relying instead on surface-level towers. Others maintain that cold storage spaces were repurposed casually, and not every prisoner suffered in icy pits. The debate circles endlessly, unresolved. Yet here you stand, in this draft-ridden chamber, and no theory comforts you when your fingers already feel stiff and numb. You try to imagine the hours ahead. Each moment is lengthened by the chill, every heartbeat dragging against the weight of cold. What would you do? Stamp your feet until exhaustion overtakes you? Curl into a ball on filthy straw? Or simply sit and wait, letting the frost claim you little by little? Survival manuals written centuries later tell soldiers to keep moving in cold, to generate heat through motion. But here, shackled or confined, movement is impossible. The advice is useless. There's a peculiar story from a medieval German folktale. A prisoner claimed he could see his own breath freezing in mid-air, forming little spirits that danced away into the dark. Of course, that is impossible, but the mind under torment creates visions. Perhaps he saw smoke curling and mistook it for ghosts. Perhaps he was already delirious. Still, the tale lingers as one of those strange human touches that make the dungeon not only physical but also psychological. The draft grows stronger for a moment, and you hear it whistle through the metal bars in the door. It sounds like someone humming an off-key tune. The hairs on your arms rise. You tell yourself it is only the wind, but dread settles anyway. You realize that fear thrives in these drafts. The cold magnifies the imagination. And isn't that perhaps part of the cruelty? When your body shivers uncontrollably, your mind falters, making you more pliable, easier to break. You lean your forehead against the damp wall. It is shockingly cold, almost burning. You pull away quickly, but the sensation lingers on your skin. If you were forced to remain here for a full day, the wall alone would leave its mark. And so, as you curl against the draft, you come to the same conclusion as every soul who has stood in your place. This isn't survivable for long. The wind does not stop, the stone does not warm, and your body does not harden fast enough. A single day in such a dungeon might be enough to unravel you entirely. Your toes begin to ache long before the rest of your body catches up. The floor underfoot is stone, but it may as well be ice. You place a bare foot down and feel the sting of cold shooting upward through your leg, a nerve-deep pain that refuses to fade. Each step becomes slower, more tentative, as if you are walking not into a dungeon but into winter itself. Medieval builders never thought to smooth these floors for comfort. They were left uneven, jagged in places, slippery in others. The stone holds centuries of moisture, and slime has spread like paint in streaks of green and black. A well-documented reality of medieval castles is that their basements often had poor drainage. Rainwater trickled down through cracks, pooling into shallow puddles where it stagnated. Archaeologists excavating fortress remains in France have found layers of slime hardened, like wax across stones, evidence that water sat there for generations. Now imagine being forced to stand or sit in that. Your skin softens, breaks, and infection creeps in quickly. And you feel it even now. You slide your heel across the slick patch and nearly lose your balance. If you were shackled, you would have no chance to catch yourself. Falling means your face would meet cold rock, and no one would care enough to lift you. You would lie there, cheek against stone that leaches away warmth like a sponge. Curiously, there are records of guards sprinkling straw over dungeon floors not to help the prisoners, but to help themselves. Without straw, the floor was so slick that even jailers risked slipping while delivering food. The straw absorbed little of the damp, but it created a deceptive mat dry on top, sodden underneath. Prisoners who thought they'd found relief soon discovered their bedding reeked of mold. And here lies the cruelest twist. Once your feet are numb, the pain vanishes, but danger grows. Frostbite does not announce itself with agony. It whispers in silence. A medieval text from Scandinavia described prisoners whose toes blackened and dropped off after winters spent in cells. Whether that text exaggerated or not, the physical truth is that bare skin against frozen stone is a battle already lost. You rub your feet together, hoping friction will help, but there is little warmth to coax. The cold eats into the bones themselves, making joints stiff. Try wiggling your toes already, they barely respond. The more you shift, the wetter they become. You imagine waking tomorrow unable to move them at all. Would the jailer notice? Only if you slowed his routine. Would he care? Certainly not. To him, you are one more body among many. Some experts continue to dispute whether medieval dungeons were this wet and icy. They argue that in certain climates, basements remain dry, especially those carved into chalk or volcanic rock. Others, however, insist that the overwhelming number of damp sites cannot be ignored. The archaeological debate remains open. But whichever side is right, the simple fact is that enough people did endure these conditions to leave us accounts. And one account is enough to make you shudder. The slime carries another danger too: infection. A small cut from stone, a blister rubbed raw by shackles, becomes a portal for disease. In an age before antibiotics, even a minor wound could mean death. Chronicles of medieval prisons describe men dying not from torture but from fevers, their bodies overwhelmed by infections that began with something as simple as cracked skin. It is an unglamorous end, but perhaps the truest one. You pause, trying to imagine what it would be like to sit here for a full day. No shoes, no socks, nothing between you and the floor. Every second is an exchange. The stone steals heat, your body struggles to replace it, and eventually the balance tips. You do not so much freeze as fade. One odd little note survives from a 16th century English traveller who claimed he saw moss patterns on dungeon floors shaped like footprints. He insisted the moss grew thicker where prisoners had stood longest, as if the plants themselves remembered the suffering. Was that poetic imagination? Almost certainly. Yet standing here, staring at the slick green sheen under your feet, you half believe it. The sound of a drip pulls your attention. Water falls from above, splashing into a puddle that ripples outward. The rhythm is irregular, unpredictable, teasing you like a cruel clock. You know time is passing, but you cannot measure it. Without sunlight, without warmth, you are trapped in an endless present. You rub your arms, but the gesture is meaningless. The cold is everywhere, seeping not only into your flesh but into your thoughts. And so, you step back, pressing your spine against the wall, trying to lift your feet off the floor just for a moment of relief. The stone behind you offers no mercy, only a new surface of icy contact. It strikes you that in a dungeon like this, there is nowhere to rest, nowhere to ease the body. Even sitting is suffering. Could you last a day like this? You shake your head instinctively, though no one can see. Already your feet throb, your skin tingles, and your breath feels shallow. The medieval prisoner did not choose to endure these flaws. He was forced, and he paid in pain. And you, listening, imagining, shivering in the comfort of your own bed, you know that one day in such a place would undo you completely. The scrape of iron against stone startles you, then you realize it is only a memory forming in your mind, the moment when the daily ration is brought. Food in this place is less nourishment and more reminder of dependence. A jailer, faceless in the gloom, pushes forward a crude wooden bowl. Inside it sloshes a watery concoction, thin enough that you can see the bottom. A few limp vegetables float adrift, maybe a barley grain or two, sometimes a strip of gristle masquerading as meat. You stare, already hungry, but the sight offers no comfort. It is no surprise, really. Documents from medieval accounts reveal that prisoners were rarely given more than survival-level meals. A common staple was gruel, essentially oats or barley boiled into a porridge so diluted it barely counted as food. If bread was offered, it was often hard as stone, made of coarse rye or millet, sometimes mixed with ground peas. The better loaves were reserved for the guards or the noble households above. You, chained below, chew until your jaw aches and still feel no fullness. And you taste it now, in your imagination, the blandness, the slight sour edge from fermentation gone too far. A sliver of carrot drifts by, but you cannot be sure if it is carrot or something less pleasant. One prisoner's account from 14th century France claims he was given soup flavored with cabbage stalks boiled so long they dissolved into mush. The jailers didn't intend cruelty. They intended efficiency. Feeding captives was a chore, not a duty. Oddly enough, there are quirky anecdotes of prisoners receiving delicacies not out of kindness, but bribery. In the Tower of London, a noble prisoner once wrote of bribing a guard to slip him roasted fowl and ale in exchange for favours. That man survived, but the ordinary thief, the beggar, the accused heretic they had, only thin gruel, no bribes, no kindness, only the ladle dripping its pale burden into their bowls. You lift the bowl to your lips and smell the sourness. Steam curls faintly upward, though it vanishes quickly in the cold air. The heat does little more than fog your nose before it cools into lukewarm sludge. You swallow, but each gulp is heavy, like mud sliding down your throat. Hunger forces you to finish, though your stomach already twists. The debate among historians continues here as well. Were prisoners deliberately starved to weaken them for questioning, or starvation simply the result of neglect and poor resources? Some argue that only high-profile captives were starved strategically, while common criminals languished on minimal rations because no one cared enough to spare food. Others believe starvation was a deliberate policy in certain regions, a slow form of punishment more efficient than whipping. There is no clear answer, only fragments of testimony. But whatever the intention, the outcome is the same: weakness. By nightfall, your legs tremble not just from cold but from emptiness. Your stomach groans, echoing against the dungeon walls as though the very stones mock you. Hunger magnifies every sound, every smell. When you hear a rat skitter by, you notice how plump it looks compared to your own hollowed frame. You wonder if you could catch it, and then recoil from your own thought. Would you eat it raw and twitching? The mind entertains such notions in desperation, and sometimes desperation became reality. Chronicles of famine years reveal that prisoners occasionally gnawed on candle stubs made of tallow, swallowing wax meant for light rather than sustenance. Others were rumoured to chew leather straps, hoping to draw a drop of nourishment from treated hide. One strange tale from Italy even claims a captive survived for weeks by catching and eating the beetles that infested his cell. Whether true or embellished, it reminds you that hunger drives humans into the unthinkable. You hold the empty bowl in your lap, staring at its stained wood. The sour odour lingers, making you nauseous even as your belly begs for more. Tomorrow, you know, the same portion will arrive. Never enough to thrive, just enough to prolong. It is the cruelest balance. Too little to strengthen you, too much to let you die quickly. As you think of the hours ahead, your mind drifts upward to the castle kitchens. Imagine the smell of roasted meats, the crackle of fat dripping into fire, the laughter of servants sneaking scraps. You below hear only the faint clatter of pots far above, each sound a reminder of a feast you will never taste. The division is absolute. They live, you exist. They feast, you wither. You lie back on the damp straw, belly hollow, and understand the design. The dungeon does not only confine you physically, it starves you slowly, drawing out the process so that you are neither alive with vigor nor dead with peace. You are suspended in a state of constant craving, every hour defined by what you lack. Would you last a day on such fare? Perhaps. But the day after? The week after? Already with only one bowl, your body feels frail. Your fingers tremble as you lift them, and your thoughts scatter like loose pages in a wind. Hunger is not a single sensation. It is an unravelling, and in the dungeon, that unravelling never stops. The moment you try to settle down, you feel it the first faint tickle at your ankle. At first, You think it's just a loose straw brushing your skin, but then it moves. Slowly, deliberately, something crawls higher. You slap at it instinctively, and a small shadow skitters away into the darkness. Rats. You've heard the rumors, but nothing prepares you for the reality of sharing your prison with creatures who know the dungeon better than you do. Rats are not occasional visitors here, they are permanent residents. With scraps of food falling, buckets rarely emptied, and straw rotting in corners, the dungeon is paradise for vermin. One chronicler of the 15th century noted that the rats in Newgate prison did grow so bold they would gnaw the very shoes from men's feet as they slept. The statement might sound like an exaggeration, but archaeological digs have revealed bones of small animals with gnaw marks consistent with rat teeth inside old prison layers. The evidence doesn't lie, these dungeons were feasting grounds. You shift uncomfortably, listening. Their claws scratch faintly against stone, a rhythm that repeats, pauses, and resumes. You hear them squeak to each other, invisible in the gloom, planning routes along the walls. The thought of them circling you, watching for weakness, sets your pulse racing. One curious account from a Spanish dungeon describes rats so unafraid that they ran across the faces of prisoners at night, as if the humans were nothing more than lumps of straw. You feel a phantom sensation across your cheek already. And it isn't just rats. Where dampness thrives, insects follow. Lice burrow into seams of clothing, their bites leaving relentless itching that never stops. Medieval letters from prisoners complain of vermin biting at all hours, so that sleep becomes impossible. You scratch at your neck now, though you know nothing is there yet. Bedbugs, fleas, beetles, all would have made their homes in this straw, in these cracks, in your very hair. The debate among modern researchers continues. Were vermin truly this overwhelming, or have centuries of storytelling magnified their presence? Some argue that not every dungeon was infested, pointing to cleaner cells reserved for noble captives. But others cite medical records showing disease outbreaks linked directly to lice and fleas carried by prisoners. In truth, conditions likely varied, but even one louse, one flea, is enough when you have no way to wash or change clothes. You lean back against the wall and close your eyes, but the crawling continues in your imagination. Every itch becomes suspect. Was it straw? Was it a flea? Your mind cannot decide, and so your body twitches constantly. Sleep is impossible. You picture the lice burrowing at your scalp, the fleas hopping from straw to skin, the beetles wandering across your arms. There is no barrier, no sheet, no blanket to shield you. Oddly, one record tells of prisoners befriending rats, feeding them crumbs in exchange for companionship. A bizarre comfort, perhaps, but when human contact is rare, even vermin feel like allies. One German tale recounts a man who claimed the rats warmed his body by curling against him in winter. Whether true or not, it highlights the desperation of people who clung to any form of life around them. Still, you know the danger. Vermin are not neutral. They bite, they steal food, and more importantly, they carry plague. It was fleas from rats that spread the Black Death across Europe, and though not every dungeon was an outbreak site, the association was strong enough to terrify. To share space with them was to live with death's messengers. A scratching sound grows louder now, and you glance down to see a pair of glinting eyes at the edge of the straw. The rat stares at you, whiskers twitching, bold and unafraid. You move suddenly, but it only darts a few inches away before pausing again. It knows you are weak. It knows this dungeon belongs to it, not you. And in the silence that follows, you realize you are not a prisoner alone, you are one animal among many, struggling for scraps in the same pit. Try to last a day like this, with every hour filled by itching, by scratching, by listening to claws in the dark. Try to keep your sanity when you cannot tell if the crawling on your arm is real or imagined. Hunger gnaws from inside, vermin from outside, until you are nothing more than a buffet for things smaller than you. And all the while, the dungeon watches silently, knowing it does not need chains alone to break you. The torch sputters once, twice, and then dies with a hiss, leaving you wrapped in a darkness so complete it feels alive. Your eyes strain, searching for even a trace of light, but there is nothing, only the faint glow of memory lingering on your retinas. The dark here is not the kind you know at home, where a lamp from a neighboring street might slip through the curtains, or the moon might soften the sky. This is absolute, suffocating, a void that makes you question whether your eyes are even open. Contemporary accounts from medieval prisons remark often on this smothering blackness. One monk, writing in the 14th century, noted that a man kept in a dungeon may not know day from night for weeks, his mind unravelling with the hours. The absence of light was not an accident, it was deliberate. Depriving prisoners of sun and flame stripped them of time itself, dissolving their grasp on reality. You stretch out a hand, hoping to feel the outline of the wall, but even your sense of touch betrays you. The air is clammy and thick, and each movement stirs only silence. You try to orient yourself by sound, but the acoustics twist in circles, so that the faintest drip seems to come from everywhere at once. You open your mouth to speak, just to hear your own voice, but even that is swallowed almost instantly. Your words return, faint and distorted, like another person mocking you. And here lies the cruel fact. Humans are not built for absolute dark. Our brains, deprived of visual input, begin to invent. Prisoners wrote of seeing shapes, glowing outlines, even phantom fires dancing in the corners. One odd tale from a Hungarian fortress describes a captive who swore he saw an angel appear nightly, only to vanish when he reached out his hand. Historians suspect he suffered hallucinations from sensory deprivation. Yet in the silence, in the void, can you blame him for grasping at light wherever he could find it? You shuffle forward carefully, but your foot catches on something unseen, and you stumble. A splash tells you that you've stepped into a puddle, the icy water soaking instantly through cloth to skin. The sudden cold is shocking, but worse is the realization that you couldn't see it coming. You are blind here, not by nature but by design. Even shackles seem secondary when your world is reduced to nothingness. Researchers still debate how common these pitch-black cells really were. Some argue that many so-called dungeons were not designed to be utterly dark, pointing to ventilation shafts that allowed light to filter in during the day. Others counter that even a small opening could be blocked, leaving prisoners in oppressive night. Archaeological evidence is inconclusive, and so the debate continues, unresolved. But for you, in this moment, the reality is undeniable. You cannot see, and you cannot know how long this will last. The longer you sit, the more tricks your mind plays. You start to imagine faint glimmers, like stars blinking in the distance. You blink quickly, thinking perhaps your eyes are adjusting, but no, the glimmers shift, move, dissolve into nothing. They were never there. Your brain is inventing signals, desperate for stimulation, and then comes the ringing in your ears, a soft hum that grows louder the longer you focus on it, until silence itself becomes unbearable. There is one peculiar practice noted in certain medieval sources. Jailers would sometimes intentionally douse torches and let the dark do their work for them. Rather than inflict beatings, they let prisoners sit in blackness, knowing that fear of the unseen could be worse than visible pain. You think of that now as you rub your arms, feeling the phantom presence of shapes that aren't real. And yet, for all the terror, there is also monotony. Hours stretch endlessly. Without sight, without sound but your own, you are suspended in a void where time collapses. One prisoner wrote that he counted his own breaths to mark hours, only to lose track and despair. You try now, inhaling, exhaling, whispering numbers. But quickly you forget whether you are at 30 or 40, whether you skipped one or repeated it. Time dissolves into the black. The strangest sensation of all is how your body begins to disappear from your awareness. Your hands, your legs, They fade into the same nothing that surrounds you. You wiggle your toes just to make sure they are still attached. In the absence of light, even your own flesh becomes doubtful. You are not just alone, you are dissolving. Could you last a day like this? Perhaps physically. Your heart would still beat, your lungs still fill, but your mind would rebel. Already it whispers lies, painting visions on the void. Already it steals your confidence, telling you that perhaps you are no longer real yourself. And so, in the dungeon's perfect darkness, you understand the cruelty. You do not need chains to be broken. You only need night, stretched endlessly, until you cannot tell if the sun still rises above the earth. The silence does not last. It never does. At first, it is only a faint noise carried through the stone, something like a groan, distant and drawn out. You freeze, straining to hear. Then another sound follows, sharper, echoing like a cry swallowed by the walls. It is not your imagination. There are others down here. Somewhere in the black labyrinth, people are still alive, still suffering, their voices carried to you like ghosts through corridors you cannot see. Contemporary records from medieval prisons tell us that captives were rarely kept alone. A dungeon was not designed with comfort or privacy in mind. It was a warehouse of misery. In London's infamous Newgate, multiple prisoners were crammed into cells so tight that chroniclers wrote of them lying like pigs in a sty, the stronger crushing the weaker beneath them. Even solitary confinement, when it existed, was never truly silent. The walls bled noise from neighbouring cells, weeping, coughing, praying, sometimes the rattle of chains against stone. You hear it now, a cough, rasping and wet, a whisper that turns into a mutter, and then the unmistakable sound of someone pleading. The words are too faint to understand, but the tone is unmistakable. Desperation. You press your back harder against the wall, as if that could shut the voices out. Yet the echoes carry, seeping into your bones. What is worse is that the cries change over time. Some begin as wails of outrage, pounding against doors and demanding release. But after hours or days they transform. Outrage gives way to sobbing, sobbing to whimpering, and finally to silence. The dungeon does not break you with one hammer blow. It grinds you down, layer by layer, until your voice itself fades. There are strange anecdotes recorded about this chorus of misery. One traveller who visited prisoners in a Neapolitan fortress wrote that guards deliberately led newcomers past the cells of long-term captives so they could hear the mad mutterings and screams. It was a psychological trick. By the time the prisoner reached his own cell, he already believed escape was impossible. You can imagine that trick working on you now. With every echo that slides through the stone, your hope shrinks a little smaller. Historians continue to disagree about how common these audible torments were. Some suggest that many prisoners were actually isolated from one another, especially nobles kept as hostages. Others argue that overcrowding was far more typical, especially in cities, where jails overflowed with the accused. The truth is likely a mix. Sometimes you would suffer alone, sometimes you would suffer surrounded. Both conditions carried their own nightmares. You try to ignore the voices, but your imagination insists on giving them faces. The cough belongs to a man slumped in straw, his ribs showing, his body racked by fever. The pleading comes from a woman, chained at the ankles, begging for water. The muttering belongs to someone already broken, mumbling prayers or curses on repeat. You tell yourself these are fictions, yet the sounds are real. They seep into your ears whether you want them or not. The oddest detail comes when you realize the voices never sync with time. A scream can sound near, then far, then near again. The acoustics of stone twist them in ways you cannot map. At one moment, the cry seems to come from your left. A moment later, it circles behind you. You spin, but of course you see nothing. The dungeon makes you a puppet, dancing to echoes that have no origin. One recorded prisoner in the 15th century claimed he could identify his fellow captives by the pitch of their screams. He said one man's cry was like a child's wail, another like a wolf howling in snow. Whether true or the invention of a fevered mind, the story illustrates how the human ear, deprived of sight, turns every sound into a marker of identity. You know this now yourself. You are cataloguing coughs and sighs in the dark, turning strangers into companions against your will. But companionship is not what you feel. You feel dread, because every cry is also a reminder of your own fragility. You are not special. You are not stronger. If they broke, you will break. If they pleaded, you will plead. The dungeon does not care whose voice fills its chamber. It only cares that all voices eventually fade. The noise subsides for a while, leaving you with nothing but your own heartbeat. For a moment, you almost miss the company. Then a shriek cuts through the air, sharp, sudden, agonized. It lasts only a few seconds, but it pierces like a blade. And then silence returns, deeper than before. You sit frozen, ears ringing, chest heaving. Did the shriek end because the pain ended or because the life did? You realize something chilling then. You would rather not know. Knowledge would not free you. It would only trap you further. Better to sit in uncertainty than to carry the certainty of another's end in your mind. And that, perhaps, is the dungeon's final cruelty. It makes ignorance feel safer than truth. So you curl tighter, covering your ears with your hands, rocking gently. But the sounds seep through your palms anyway, faint as whispers. They will not stop, not for as long as you breathe in this place. A single day of echoes is enough to fracture your mind. And the worst part? You cannot tell whether tomorrow will bring more screams or none at all. You think you have grown used to the smells of mildew and damp straw until you reach the far corner of the chamber. There, the air curdles into something sharper, more nauseating, a stench that grips your throat and refuses to release it. You gag before you even see the source. Every dungeon had to solve the same problem. What to do when dozens of human bodies, eating and drinking, however little, still produced waste? The answer was usually brutal in its simplicity. Place a bucket in the corner, or dig a shallow pit, and let the prisoners fend for themselves. Contemporary descriptions from jails in London and Paris confirm this with grim clarity. Records describe foul tubs, left unemptied until they overflowed, the liquid soaking into straw and stone alike. In some cases, the stench was so bad that even the guards refused to linger, tossing food through grates rather than stepping inside. Archaeologists examining cesspits beneath castles in Germany and Scotland have uncovered layers of compacted filth, human waste mixed with straw, bones, and even insects preserved as a testament to centuries of neglect. You edge closer and feel the floor slick beneath your foot. The smell intensifies, heavy and acidic, coating your tongue as though you've swallowed it. You press a sleeve against your nose, but the fabric is damp and reeks of mildew already. There is no barrier. The odor seeps into your lungs, becomes part of you. One peculiar note from a 15th century account mentions that prisoners sometimes fought over spots furthest from the bucket. Those forced to sit closest were considered cursed, despised by their fellow captives. Imagine enduring not only the stench, but the contempt of others as well. In a place where dignity was already stripped away, even the geography of filth became a hierarchy. You crouch low, your stomach turning. Insects gather here, more numerous than anywhere else in the dungeon. Beetles swarm across the damp straw, and flies buzz thickly, searching for sustenance in decay. At night, when the torchlight dies, you know they will come for you as well, drawn by warmth and sweat. Already you feel phantom wings brushing against your ears. Debates among scholars linger about whether every medieval prison was this vile. Some argue that wealthier castles likely maintain better sanitation for noble hostages, perhaps even granting access to garderobe stone privies built along the castle wall. Others counter that the vast majority of prisoners were commoners, and commoners were left with nothing more than a bucket, emptied irregularly at best. The truth is probably both. The highborn sat above their own drains, the lowborn wallowed in their own filth. You can almost hear it sloshing when you step back, the faint ripple of liquid shifting inside the pail. That sound, more than the sight, is what breaks you. It is not only disgusting, it is dehumanizing. You realize you are not treated as a person but as waste, to be managed, discarded, and forgotten. And still, one bizarre anecdote survives of a prisoner who turned this misery into mockery. In a French poem from the late Middle Ages, a jailed troubadour wrote verses comparing his bucket to a golden chalice, claiming that even kings could not boast such intimacy with their vessels. Was he joking to keep his sanity? Or did he truly believe it? Perhaps humor was the only shield he had left. You step back farther, pressing against the cold wall, desperate to escape the stench. But there is no escape. In a sealed chamber, odors do not stay politely in corners. They fill every breath, cling to every thread of cloth, seep into every pore. You will carry this smell out with you, if you ever leave. It will mark you as surely as the shackles on your wrists. And so you understand the cruel genius of this arrangement. A man can fight chains, he can resist hunger, he can endure cold, but he cannot stop breathing. To live, you must inhale, and to inhale, you must accept the dungeon into your body. That is the bucket's final victory it makes. Survival itself feel like contamination. Could you last a day beside it? Perhaps, if you had no choice. But would you still feel human after that day? That is the deeper question. For in this dungeon, surrounded by filth, you begin to see yourself not as a person at all, but as another creature in the dark, reduced to the same level as the rats and insects that scurry across the floor. The first sound you learn to fear in the dungeon is not the scream of another prisoner. It is the steady rhythm of boots on stone. At first, the noise seems far away, faint enough that you might mistake it for the echo of dripping water. But then it grows louder, deliberate, unhurried, accompanied by the clink of metal, a key ring, a sword hilt, the unmistakable signals of authority approaching. You hold your breath, even though you know they already know you are here. Accounts from medieval prisons consistently remind us that guards controlled not just bodies but the very concept of time. A prisoner never knew when a jail would arrive, whether for food, for inspection, or for punishment. Some guards were indifferent, delivering bread and water with mechanical routine. Others relished the power, drawing out their steps, rattling keys, letting the anticipation itself serve as torture. One English chronicler noted that prisoners often trembled more at the sound of keys jangling than at the lash of a whip, because the keys meant something was about to happen, and it was never good. You feel it now. The steps approach slowly, each strike against the stone sending a vibration through your chest. They stop, and silence floods in. You imagine the guard standing just beyond your door, watching through a slit. Is he smiling? Is he bored? You cannot know, and the uncertainty gnaws at you. Then comes the metallic scrape of the lock. The sound is sharp, cruelly final. You wince as though struck, because you know what it means. Intrusion. Perhaps he will shove a crust of bread through the bars, or perhaps he will drag someone away. You do not control the outcome. You only wait. Oddly, one quirky detail found in records is that some guards developed rituals with their prisoners. A jailer in Florence was said to whistle the same tune each night so captives could brace themselves before he entered. Another in Prague reportedly knocked twice on the wall before unlocking the door, not out of kindness but out of habit, like a farmer knocking before feeding pigs. To the captives, these tiny signals became lifelines, moments of predictability in a world ruled by chaos. But tonight you have no such mercy. The lock grinds, the door creaks, and torchlight spills suddenly into the gloom, stabbing your eyes. The silhouette of the guard fills the frame, faceless against the fire's glare. He steps inside, boots splashing through puddles, the smoke from his torch mixing with the mildew of the cell. You cough, but quickly muffle it, afraid of drawing attention. The question historians still argue is whether guards in these places were brutal by training or by circumstance. Some suggest that cruelty was expected. A jailer who showed leniency risked his own position. Others argue that many guards were little more than poorly paid men doing a dirty job, indifferent rather than sadistic. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere between. But when you are the one crouching in the shadows, the distinction hardly matters. The boot is still heavy, the key is still cold, and the power is still absolute. He lingers, scanning the chamber. Perhaps he counts heads. Perhaps he waits for someone to flinch. You feel his gaze even if you cannot see his eyes. Your body betrays you, trembling in spite of your best efforts to appear invisible. You wonder if he notices. You wonder if that is what he wants. And then, just as suddenly as he arrived, he turns. The torchlight shifts, shadows twist, and the boots retreat. The lock slams shut once more, leaving you in blackness again. Relief washes over you for a moment, but it is not true relief. It is only a pause, a lull before the next time the footsteps return. One odd tale survives from a 15th century French prison. A captive claimed he began to dream the sound of footsteps, so vividly that he could not tell whether he was awake or asleep. Sometimes he would shout, certain the guard was approaching, only to find himself alone in silence. Over time, he wrote, the imagined steps became worse than the real ones. You understand him now. The echo of boots lingers in your ears long after the guard has gone. You sit rigid, listening, waiting, rehearsing in your mind what you would do if the door opened again. But there is nothing you can do. You are powerless, and the guard knows it. That is why the footsteps terrify more than any chain or bucket. The steps remind you that at any moment, without reason, your fragile routine can shatter. Could you endure a day of that sound? The randomness, the anticipation, the jangle of keys that promises nothing good? Perhaps. But your mind would fracture, flinching at every noise, dreading every silence. And in the end, you realize the footsteps are not just sounds. They are reminders that your life belongs to someone else, measured out one echo at a time. Time stretches strangely in the dungeon. Hours feel like days, and yet when something stirs the silence, your heart jumps as if only minutes had passed. Tonight, though, what stirs you is not the guard's boots but whispers, rumors drifting down the stairwell, stories carried by other prisoners, fragments overheard when keys scrape and doors open. These are tales of the instruments kept in shadow, contraptions designed not for containment but for agony. And the one name you hear again and again is the Iron Maiden. It is a legend, you remind yourself, but legends cling hardest in the dark. You picture the device as you've seen in illustrations, a towering sarcophagus of iron, hinged like a coffin, its interior lined with spikes. The prisoner is placed inside, the doors closed, and the body is pierced slowly, fatally. Some accounts describe spikes arranged to miss vital organs at first, prolonging the torment so that death comes in hours rather than seconds. The cold fact is that no reliable medieval record proves such a device existed in its infamous form. Most historians today suggest the Iron Maiden is a myth invented centuries later, pieced together from fragments of older torture devices. They argue that tales of its use were exaggerated, perhaps even fabricated, by 19th century curators eager to thrill visitors at museums. Still, the object itself, reconstructed from parts of old coffins and spikes, sits on display in places like Nuremberg, and its image has burned itself into popular imagination. But here, in the dungeon, rumor is as powerful as reality. You cannot shake the thought of a steel coffin waiting in some nearby chamber. You picture the dull gleam of metal in torchlight, the echo of hinges creaking open, the claustrophobic slam of doors closing. And even if the real device never stood here, other tortures certainly did. chains that stretch the body until joints pop, whips studded with knots or wire, boots filled with wedges that crush bones slowly. One peculiar detail from a 17th century inventory lists a chair of nails in a castle dungeon, essentially a seat studded with spikes where prisoners were forced to sit motionless. Even if the Iron Maiden is a later myth, the principle it embodies, the bending of confinement and slow mutilation, was very real in other forms. You cannot comfort yourself by thinking such cruelty was impossible. The whispers grow more vivid in your imagination. You hear another prisoner mutter about the spikes, insisting he saw them with his own eyes. Another swears that someone locked inside was heard praying for hours before silence fell. Perhaps these are inventions. Perhaps they are memories warped by fear. But when you are trapped in the dark, rumor is truth enough. Scholars still wrestle with the problem of distinguishing fact from folklore here. Was the Iron Maiden ever used in medieval Europe? Or is it merely a museum hoax retrofitted into history? Some insist there is no evidence at all for its existence before the 18th century. Others argue that descriptions of spiked coffins in earlier chronicles cannot be dismissed entirely. The debate remains unresolved. Yet for you, in this cell, none of that matters. The mere thought is enough to make your stomach twist. Because the dungeon thrives not only on what is real, but on what is imagined. You sit shackled, unable to see beyond the door, and your mind fills the void with horrors. The hiss of a lock might mean food, or it might mean you will be dragged toward that spiked coffin. The uncertainty gnaws harder than hunger. You press your palms over your ears, trying to block out the mutterings from neighboring cells, but their words stick anyway. You imagine the narrow interior of the device, the way iron would close around you like a second skin. You imagine leaning just slightly and feeling sharp points break the flesh. Not deeply, but enough to draw blood. Enough to remind you that every breath presses you further inward. The claustrophobia alone would suffocate you, even before the spikes did. One bizarre anecdote from later centuries tells of a reconstructed Iron Maiden used as a spectacle. Tour guides would place straw mannequins inside and shut the door, letting visitors gasp at the piercing thuds. Even if this was theatre rather than history, the idea travelled backward in time, embedding itself in the medieval dungeon's legend. And in the mind of a prisoner, legend feels as heavy as fact. You curl tighter in your straw, whispering reassurances to yourself. It isn't real. It can't be real. Yet the dungeon does not care. Its power lies in convincing you that any horror might be waiting. By the end of a single day, you know the rumor has done its work. The Iron Maiden may be a myth, but the fear it breeds is entirely real, and fear is as fatal as iron. You wake, or perhaps you never truly slept, to the constant drip of water above your head. The sound is steady, maddening, a rhythm that replaces any sense of day or night. Each drop falls with a soft pat, echoing through the chamber, a cruel clock that marks time not in hours but in torments. And with every drop comes dampness, creeping further into your clothes, your hair, your bones. It is no accident. Many medieval cells were dug directly into bedrock or built at the lowest point of castles, where moisture gathered naturally. Without drainage, water seeped constantly from ceilings and walls, turning floors into swamps. Excavations in old French fortresses reveal mineral stains running like veins across stone, proving centuries of uninterrupted seepage. It was not merely unpleasant, it was destructive, breaking mortar, crumbling walls, and corroding iron. And of course, it destroyed prisoners faster still. You lift your hand to brush away a droplet, but another falls almost immediately, striking skin with icy precision. The water is cold enough to sting. Within minutes, your hair clings wetly to your forehead, and your clothes sag with heaviness. The chill spreads, gnawing at your body from outside in. There are odd accounts of water being used not only incidentally but intentionally as torment. In later centuries, so-called Chinese water torture became infamous, yet some European chronicles describe similar practices earlier. A prisoner bound beneath a drip, forced to endure each drop striking the same spot on his forehead until his sanity unraveled. Whether these stories were exaggerated or not, you cannot shake the feeling that your cell itself has been designed to mimic that cruelty. And then there is the stench of damp. Mildew thrives here, green and black patches spreading across stone like wounds. You lean closer and smell it earthy, sour, suffocating. One well-documented fact is that chronic respiratory diseases often plagued prisoners. Records from England describe men coughing up phlegm, their lungs infected after months in moisture-laden air. Modern researchers studying bones from medieval cemeteries have found evidence of tuberculosis among populations likely exposed to such environments. The damp was not just uncomfortable, it was lethal. You shift, searching for a dry spot to sit, but none exists. Every corner glistens with sheen. The straw under you squelches when pressed, soaked through. You imagine mold spores swirling invisibly, slipping into your lungs with every breath. You cough, and the sound echoes back, sharp and lonely. Curiously, a prisoner in Italy once carved into the wall a tally of drips he claimed to have counted, thousands upon thousands, each one marked by a notch. Was it an attempt to measure time, or a desperate grasp at sanity by giving shape to the endless rhythm? You cannot know, but you understand him. Already the drip feels eternal, and you wonder if numbering it might at least make it finite. Historians continue to debate how deliberate such conditions were. Some argue that dungeons were simply the most practical spaces available, and the damp was an unfortunate byproduct of construction. Others maintain that jailers knew full well the misery moisture caused and exploited it. After all, a wet prisoner was a weakened prisoner. The truth may be both. Accident turned into opportunity. The water is not only a torment in itself, but also a thief of warmth. You shiver violently now, the cold amplified by damp fabric pressed against your skin. Your muscles ache from clenching. Your teeth chatter uncontrollably. Try to sleep like this. Every drop wakes you again. Every shiver shakes you. Rest becomes impossible. And then you think about time. What if the drip continues not just through one night, not just through one day, but for weeks? Could your mind endure? Already the sound burrows into your skull, a metronome of suffering. You imagine it echoing even in silence, carrying with you if you ever left. One strange anecdote survives from Germany. A prisoner claimed he could tell the weather outside by the pattern of the drips inside. On stormy days, the water fell heavier. On clear days, lighter. It became his only connection to the world beyond, a cruel reminder that nature continued above while he drowned below. Perhaps that was true, perhaps imagined. Either way, the drip was his calendar, his clock, his captor. You pull your knees to your chest, trying to shield yourself, but the drops find you anyway. They always will. That is the nature of the dungeon. Even when nothing is actively inflicted upon you, the environment itself conspires against you. Cold, wet, endless, these are weapons as sharp as any blade. Could you last a day beneath such a ceiling? The question itself feels naive. A day is survivable in the physical sense. Your body would endure, however miserable. But your mind? By the end of those hours, you would dream of silence, of dryness, of any place where water did not claim every moment. And you know with sinking certainty that the drip would follow you forever, echoing in memory long after the dungeon let you go. The night stretches longer than you believed possible. You curl yourself into the smallest shape you can manage, knees pressed against your chest, arms wrapped tightly around them. Shivering rattles through you like a drumbeat you cannot silence. Every attempt at rest collapses into spasms of trembling. The straw beneath you offers no warmth. It is damp, crawling with unseen life, and thinner than paper against the merciless stone. Medieval accounts often describe the misery of sleeping conditions in dungeons. In London's Marshalsea, prisoners complained of lying on the bare ground, with nothing but a wisp of straw between them and the cold earth. In Germany's castles, straw was sometimes replaced only once every few months, by which time it had become a breeding ground for lice, fleas, and worse. The act of lying down was not rest. It was surrender to discomfort. You shift, trying to find a position that lessens the chill, but each angle fails. When you press against the wall, the stone drains heat faster than the air. When you roll onto your back, damp straw clings to your skin. On your side, your hip grinds against unforgiving stone through the thin layer of rotting stalks. Sleep here is not a gift. It is a battle, and it is one you are already losing. Oddly enough, some records mention prisoners deliberately staying awake rather than attempting to sleep, because lying down only made them colder. One account from Italy describes a captive pacing within the limits of his chains, stamping his feet and swinging his arms through the night to generate heat. But exhaustion always wins. Eventually the body collapses, and the cold takes its toll anyway. The strangest thought strikes you then. Even your own breath betrays you. You exhale, and the warmth curls briefly in the air, only to vanish, leaving your body emptier. You begin to think of your breath not as life, but as tiny fragments of heat escaping you. How many exhales before nothing is left? You try to hold your breath for a moment, to save the warmth, but instinct forces it out again. The dungeon always wins. Historians disagree about whether such cold truly killed prisoners or merely weakened them. Some claim death from exposure was common, especially in winter, while others argue that starvation and disease were far more deadly. But bones tell their own story. Archaeological studies reveal signs of hypothermia on remains, patterns of stress in joints and teeth, suggesting bodies subjected to prolonged cold. Whether or not it was the most common killer, it was certainly a silent one. And silence is what presses on you now. You strain to listen for others, for the cough, the shuffle, the distant cry, but all has gone quiet. Are they asleep, or have they given up? The silence becomes heavier than noise, a weight that presses down on your chest. You shiver harder, not only from cold but from loneliness. A curious anecdote survives from a French prisoner's diary. He wrote that during the coldest nights, he would pretend his straw mat was a field of summer grass, and he would hum harvest songs to himself until he drifted into uneasy slumber. It sounds almost sweet, but you sense the desperation in it. He was not celebrating the memory, he was clinging to it like a rope. You try the same, closing your eyes and imagining warmth. Perhaps a hearth fire, perhaps a summer meadow buzzing with bees. But the cold breaks in each time, dragging you back. Memory cannot generate heat. The dungeon always reminds you of what you do not have. You roll onto your other side, tucking your hands between your legs for warmth. Your fingers are stiff, your joints aching. The straw prickles against your cheek, but you do not move away. Even discomfort feels like a barrier against the deeper cold. You listen to your own teeth clattering softly, a sound you cannot stop. It becomes a lullaby of sorts, a strange reminder that at least you are still alive. But will you be in the morning? That thought intrudes again and again. A day in this dungeon feels like a lifetime, and yet your body may not last beyond it. You think of medieval reports of prisoners found frozen as stone by dawn, their straw clinging to stiff limbs. Did they know, as you do now, that their last breath would fog the air before disappearing forever? Could you last a single day like this, shivering, curling, twitching awake every few moments? Perhaps your heart would keep beating, but your spirit would unravel long before dawn. And in that unraveling lies the true cruelty of the dungeon, not just freezing your body, but erasing your will to survive. At last you collapse onto the straw, but instead of comfort, a new torment greets you. The mat beneath you is not soft but jagged, the stalks brittle and broken, scratching at your skin like needles. You shift your weight, but each movement sends another prickle across your arms and legs. The straw is thin, scattered in clumps, and more dirt than bedding. Records from medieval prisons confirm this detail with unnerving regularity. Straw was issued not as a kindness, but as the cheapest, most disposable form of bedding. A report from England's Fleet Prison mentions that straw was replaced only 4 times a year on Christmas, Easter, Midsummer, and Michaelmas. By the time fresh stalks arrived, the old was a foul mat of dust, vermin, and disease. It was bedding in name alone. You brush your hand across it, and lice scatter like shadows, too quick to catch. You slap at your thigh, certain you felt something jump. Within minutes, the itching begins. It crawls along your arms, your neck, into your scalp. You scratch furiously, but the relief is momentary. The insects return instantly, as if mocking your efforts. Prisoner letters from the 15th century describe this vividly. One lamented that the straw I lay upon did bite me more cruelly than the whip. Another claimed his fellow captives tore handfuls of straw away each night to shake loose the lice before lying down again. Though the effort was pointless, the creatures always returned. You feel the truth of this as the itching becomes constant, inescapable. Curiously, a few odd stories suggest some prisoners grew attached to their straw. One Italian noble recorded that he wove little figures from the stalks, fashioning tiny crosses or animals to pass the time. He even spoke of naming them, giving them personalities to keep loneliness away. It sounds absurd, but you can almost understand it. In a place where everything hurts, even straw becomes something to cling to. The debate among scholars continues. Were infestations universal, or were some dungeons relatively clean? Some argue that noble hostages received fresh straw frequently, perhaps even wool blankets. Others point to overwhelming testimony from common prisoners who endured vermin daily. The evidence is uneven, but for the majority, the thieves, the beggars, the nameless, it seems, lice and fleas were as certain as chains. You roll onto your back and feel the straw snap beneath you, sharp ends poking into your shoulders. The dampness clings as well, soaking into your tunic, spreading a chill that will not leave. You imagine lying here for days, weeks, months. Each night the straw grows filthier. Each morning the itching worsens, until your body itself becomes a hive. You picture sores opening on your skin, infections spreading, the slow wasting that medieval chroniclers often described as rotting alive. And then comes the smell. Straw, when fresh, carries a sweet grassy scent, but here, mingled with sweat, mildew, and waste, it stinks of rot. You inhale and gag, the odour thick as smoke in your lungs. Your bed does not comfort you, it suffocates you. One peculiar account from Germany claims that prisoners sometimes burned handfuls of their straw for brief warmth, even though it meant sleeping directly on stone afterward. The risk of smoke and punishment did not outweigh the temptation of a few moments of heat. Imagine choosing between fire and fleas, between ash and itch. You realize such choices are inevitable here, each one crueler than the last. You scratch again at your arm, skin raw beneath your nails. The insects are relentless. You imagine them marching in rows, conquering your body like an invading army. Your scalp tingles constantly. You shake your head, but they cling tighter. Sleep becomes impossible. Every moment is broken by twitching, slapping, scratching. The straw whispers another cruelty. It keeps no secrets. Guards know when you stir, when you thrash, because the rustling carries through stone. One jailer wrote smugly in his log that he could tell which prisoners were restless of conscience by how often their straw rustled at night. Perhaps he was mocking, or perhaps he believed guilt made them fidget, but you know better. It is not guilt. It is vermin, dampness, and pain. You curl tightly, trying to minimize contact with the bedding, but it is impossible. The straw surrounds you, beneath you, against you, inside you. It is a reminder that in the dungeon, even the things meant to soften your suffering become weapons against you. Could you last a single day lying on such a mat? You might survive physically, though your skin would burn with scratches, your body quake with chills, your mind itch with invisible invaders. But the cost would be steep. By the end of that day, you would no longer think of straw as comfort. You would think of it as betrayal, proof that in this place, Nothing, not even your bed exists to help you. You lose sense of night and day, but you know when morning comes not because sunlight reaches you, but because the cold somehow sharpens. A harsher draught seeps through the vent, carrying with it the bite of dawn frost. Your body, already weakened, trembles violently as if the chill itself has grown teeth. There is no mercy in mornings here. They do not bring light or renewal. They bring another wave of endurance. You are too tired to fight. Written records from the Tower of London note that some prisoners referred to mornings as the cruel hour. After nights of restless shivering, the sudden drop in temperature often pushed them into illness. Pneumonia, pleurisy, and fevers claimed many lives not through chains or whips, but through the simple cruelty of exposure. Archaeologists studying mass graves near medieval jails have found skeletal lesions consistent with long-term respiratory infections, evidence that cold air killed as effectively as any executioner. You feel the truth of that now. Each inhale burns, each exhale clouds the air in a mist that vanishes instantly. Your chest aches from coughing, and your ribs throb with each convulsion. You wrap your arms tighter around yourself, but it is useless. The dungeon has no blankets, no hearth. Only your own body stands between you and the cold, and your body is failing. A peculiar note survives from a chronicle in Denmark. Prisoners would sometimes huddle together, not out of friendship, but necessity, sharing warmth like animals. Even enemies embraced, knowing hatred could wait for daylight but cold could not. In solitary cells, though, there was no such grim companionship. You have only your own thin frame, curled into a ball that grows smaller as the hours crawl. Scholars argue about whether these damp basements were intended to be lethal or merely convenient. Some suggest jailers simply used whatever space was available, never caring how freezing it became. Others claim that cold itself was considered a form of punishment cheaper than guards, cheaper than chains, and infinitely effective. The debate remains unsettled, but when your body trembles uncontrollably, the academic question feels irrelevant. Cold is cruelty, whether by accident or by design. You try to distract yourself with thought. Perhaps, you tell yourself, morning will bring food. The jailer might come, pushing through the door with a ladle of gruel. For a moment, you imagine the warmth of steam rising, however thin, but the thought is fragile. You know already how quickly the gruel cools in this air, how little comfort it provides, and so even hope feels cold. Your joints ache when you shift, knees stiff, fingers numb, toes without feeling. You rub at them, but friction does little. You whisper to yourself, muttering words not for meaning but for sound, anything to remind you that you are still alive. But your voice shakes, thin and weak, and you wonder how long before even speaking feels impossible. An odd story is told of a Polish prisoner who survived winter confinement by singing loudly each dawn. He claimed the act warmed his chest and gave him strength. Neighbors thought him mad, but he endured longer than most. You think of him now, but your own throat is raw from coughing. A song would break into gasps before it reached its second line. The air grows brighter in sound, if not in sight. You hear faint stirrings above boots, doors, distant bells. Morning activity in the castle has begun. Nobles are rising, servants bustling, fires being lit in kitchens. The contrast is unbearable. Up there, warmth and routine. Down here, frost and misery. It feels like two different worlds, separated only by stone. You stretch a hand toward the vent, chasing the illusion of light. Nothing greets you but sharper wind. Your skin cracks at the knuckles, splitting painfully. A bead of blood wells up, bright against the pallor of your hand, before the cold thickens it into sluggishness. You suck the wound instinctively, tasting iron. Even your own blood feels chilled. The worst part of morning is not the cold itself, but the realization that another day has begun. Survival is not a victory, it is a sentence. You know you must endure another round of hours, each one stretched thin by hunger, damp, and dread. You are no closer to freedom, no closer to warmth, only deeper in exhaustion. Could you last a day of these mornings? Your body might cling to life for a while, but your mind would fracture under the weight of repetition. Each dawn would not renew you but strip you further, until you were nothing but a husk shivering in straw. And so you learn the truth. In the dungeon, morning is not hope. Morning is just another cruelty in disguise. The silence is broken by a sharp crack, followed by a muffled groan that echoes down the corridor. You flinch, though the sound isn't aimed at you. Somewhere nearby, punishment is underway. The dungeon may be a place of confinement, but it doubles as a theatre of suffering, where the lash and the rod speak louder than any words. You strain your ears and hear it again, the whistle of leather slicing through air, then the impact against flesh, followed by a strangled cry. Historical records are blunt about corporal punishment in medieval prisons. Whipping posts stood in courtyards and sometimes within the dungeons themselves, fixed as permanent reminders of authority. A 14th century English ordinance ordered that thieves be well beaten at the jail before further judgment. In Germany, the Peitsche, a knotted whip, was a standard tool for discipline. The post was not only for pain, it was for humiliation, to make the body an example to others who listened in the shadows. You hear that humiliation now. The man cries out less with each strike, his voice breaking, until only whimpers remain. The guard laughs low, guttural, satisfied. You cannot see the scene, but your mind fills the gaps. A figure bound upright, wrists strapped to the post, back striped with red. The torchlight flickers on stone as the whip rises and falls. Each sound slices into your imagination, and in your chest, your own muscles tighten as if expecting the blow. A peculiar anecdote survives from Florence. Some jailers supposedly let prisoners whip each other, promising shorter sentences in exchange. Records suggest this happened more than once, turning survival into betrayal. One man, desperate to live, would strike his companion with ferocity, knowing the same might be done to him another day. The cruelty was not only physical but moral, forcing men to become tormentors themselves. Scholars continue to debate the role of torture and punishment in dungeons. Some argue that the image of routine beatings is exaggerated by later writers who relished the grotesque. Others maintain that corporal punishment was central, that fear kept captives docile. The lack of detailed court records leaves the truth uncertain, but echoes like the ones you hear now feel convincing. They reverberate against your ribs, reminding you that history does not need perfect evidence to hurt. You imagine the lash falling on your own back. The skin splits, blood mingles with sweat, and each strike leaves fire burning long after the leather retracts. The cold air bites into wounds, making pain sharper, and worse still is knowing there is no end. Whipping was often left to the discretion of guards. 10 strokes, 20, 30, who would count? The prisoner could collapse, faint, even die, and no one above would care. And there are stranger torments recorded too. In some places, the whipping post doubled as a frame for shackling prisoners upright overnight, forcing them to sleep standing, their raw backs pressed to wood. Others were lashed and then immediately doused with cold water, the liquid searing wounds like salt. Such details might sound like exaggerations, but contemporary diaries from townsfolk mention seeing prisoners paraded after whippings, their shirts stuck to wounds, stumbling through streets. That testimony lingers as proof that these punishments were not hidden, they were meant to be seen, heard, and feared. The noise outside your cell grows faint, replaced by moans. You wonder if the man survived, or if he lies crumpled now, ribs aching, back shredded. You wonder, too, whether you will be called next. Your stomach knots, not only at the thought of pain, but at the anticipation. Sometimes the waiting is worse than the blow itself. A strange story from France tells of a prisoner who claimed he learned to welcome the whip, because at least during punishment he felt heat rush through his body. Better burning than freezing, he supposedly told a scribe who recorded his words. It is a paradox you can almost understand. Pain, at least, is warmth of a kind. But for you, the whip is only terror. Each creak of wood, each faint shuffle of boots, makes your heart leap. You listen for footsteps approaching your door. Not yet, not now. But the dungeon teaches you this. It is only a matter of time. Could you last a day with the sound of lashes echoing in your ears, knowing you might be next? Perhaps your body could endure, but your nerves would fray. By nightfall you would flinch at every shadow, every key turning in a lock, and when the guard finally stepped inside, you would not resist. You would already be broken, long before the whip touched your back. The lash may fade from your ears, but it is replaced by another presence, one quieter, more insidious. Somewhere in the gloom, you notice marks carved into the wall. At first you think they are scratches left by rats, but when you lean closer, you see deliberate shapes, letters, words, even crude drawings. They are the voices of those who came before you, scratched into stone when no other voice could survive. In the Tower of London, these prisoner carvings are still visible rosaries, family crests, prayers etched painstakingly into the walls by men and women who knew they might never leave alive. A Tudor-era captive carved the Latin words gratia dei, sum id quod sum, by the grace of God, I am what I am. Another etched his own name again and again, as if repetition might anchor his existence against the dungeon's erasure. These fragments endure when bodies have long rotted, making the walls themselves into memorials. You run your fingers across the grooves, feeling the rough edges where stone has been worn away. Your fingertip comes away dusty, but the shape remains, a cross perhaps, or a tally mark. Some prisoners carved one stroke per day, though many gave up when they realized the scratches no longer matched any true calendar. Without sunlight, days blur into endless grey, yet still they carved, clinging to the illusion of order. One peculiar carving found in a French dungeon shows a chessboard. Archaeologists believe prisoners used pebbles as pieces, passing long hours in play. Imagine the strange defiance of that. To sit in chains, inventing games on a wall, using imagination as a weapon against despair. You picture yourself kneeling on cold stone, squinting in dim torchlight, moving invisible pawns. It would not erase misery, but it might slow madness. And madness is the other story these carvings tell. Not all are neat words or symbols. Some spiral chaotically, looping scratches etched with frantic energy. Others show distorted faces, eyes wide, mouths open in eternal screams. Scholars examining them cannot agree. Were these expressions of despair, or marks of men who had already lost their minds? The debate remains unsettled. What you know is that standing here, in the same silence, you feel the temptation to scratch your own story into the stone if only to prove you still exist. A quirky anecdote survives from a German castle, where one prisoner supposedly carved poetry mocking his captors, leaving behind couplets full of sarcasm. Centuries later, the verses were rediscovered, still etched faintly in the wall. Humor, it seems, could survive even in the darkest corners. You wonder if the act of laughing at the dungeon was its own kind of rebellion, one small spark of humanity refusing to be extinguished. You step back and realize the walls are crowded with messages, layer upon layer of names and symbols overlap, a chorus of silent voices all shouting the same plea. Remember me. Each mark is a heartbeat, a trace of someone who once sat here, shivering just as you do now. The weight of their presence presses down, as if they are all still here, watching, whispering. Some historians argue that many of these inscriptions were left not by ordinary criminals, but by political prisoners or religious dissenters, people who had both the literacy and the will to leave their words. Common thieves and beggars likely lacked such tools. Still, the markings prove that not every captive surrendered completely. Some fought back with chisels, nails, even teeth, scratching themselves into permanence. The oddest thing is how comforting these carvings feel. For a moment, you are not alone. You trace the grooves and imagine the prisoner hunched beside you, carving by dim light, whispering prayers under his breath. Perhaps he hoped you would one day touch his work and know he existed. Perhaps you are fulfilling his wish even now. But then the comfort curdles into dread. If these marks are all that remains of them, what will remain of you? A scratch in stone? A tally of days that leads nowhere? The thought weighs heavier than chains. You realize you do not fear only death. You fear erasure. The dungeon teaches you that the worst fate is not pain or hunger, but being forgotten. Would you last a day surrounded by such ghosts? Yes, your body would endure, but your mind would fracture under their silent stares. Every scratch, every mark, would whisper the same truth. They were here once, and now they are gone. And soon, you will join them, another fading groove in the endless stone. Your stomach growls again, louder this time, echoing embarrassingly in the stone chamber. The first few hours you could ignore the pangs, distracting yourself with fear of cold or whispers of footsteps. But now hunger has sharpened into something more primal. It is not a background discomfort anymore. It is a claw raking inside you, demanding attention. Medieval records often list prison diets in simple, pitiful detail: bread, water, gruel. Some jails issued one loaf per day, hard and blackened from coarse flour, so dense it was difficult to chew. Others gave barley cakes mixed with ground peas or beans. A fortunate prisoner might receive soup, but it was usually little more than cloudy water boiled with cabbage stalks or onion skins. In famine years, even that could vanish, leaving captives to starve slowly. You look at the scrap of bread tossed to you earlier. It is hard as wood, its crust crumbling into gritty dust. When you bite down, your teeth ache from the resistance. The taste is sour, bitter with mold in places, and you spit out more than you swallow. Still, you force it down. Hunger does not care about taste. Hunger wants anything, even rot. One odd note from a London prison inventory mentions bread of dog's quality being issued to captives. Historians suspect this referred to grain so poor that it was usually reserved for animal feed. Imagine being handed food meant for beasts, and knowing it was still considered too generous by your keepers. That is the level of degradation you endure here. The hunger brings with it dizziness. You lean against the wall, head spinning, eyes swimming with black dots. Your hands tremble as you try to steady yourself. Chronic underfeeding, even for a day, weakens the body rapidly. Muscles grow slack, joints ache, and thoughts scatter. A man cannot plan escape, cannot dream of freedom, when all he can think of is his next crumb of bread. Historians debate whether starvation in dungeons was deliberate or incidental. Some argue that jailers intentionally rationed prisoners to break their resistance before interrogations. Others point to economic realities: feeding captives cost money, and most lords preferred to save their grain for soldiers or servants. Either way, the result was the same. The prisoner wasted away, each day thinner, each day weaker. Your imagination takes a darker turn. You think of the rats scurrying in corners, fat, plump, fed well on scraps you can't reach. You watch them with new eyes. They are not vermin anymore, they are food. The thought horrifies you at first, but hunger dulls disgust. You imagine snapping one in your hands, biting into it raw. The image sickens you, yet your stomach rumbles louder. You understand why chronicles tell of men reduced to eating vermin, insects, even leather straps boiled into chewable pulp. A peculiar story survives from Naples. A prisoner supposedly gnawed on his own shoes, softened in water until the leather peeled apart. He lived weeks longer than his cellmates. It sounds grotesque, but standing here, weak and hollow, you begin to believe it. Desperation erases lines you once thought unbreakable. You stagger to the water trough in the corner. The liquid is greenish, floating with slime. You hesitate, but thirst overrides caution. You scoop a handful and drink, gagging at the taste. It is earthy, bitter, coated with filth, but at least it fills your stomach for a moment. The relief is fleeting. Soon you are hungrier than before, your body demanding fuel that never comes. One odd prisoner account mentions gnawing on straw itself, chewing the stalks until his gums bled, just to trick his stomach into thinking it was eating. Another wrote of scraping mortar from the wall and swallowing dust, desperate for the feeling of fullness. You think of them now as your own hunger drives you to madness. Would you chew the wall? Would you eat straw? Insects? Anything at all? And then the dizziness worsens. You slump back into the straw, clutching your stomach. Hunger is no longer a physical ache but a fog across your mind. You struggle to hold on to coherent thought. Time fractures. Minutes feel like hours, hours like years. The cold, the dark, the stench, all of it blends into a single truth. You are starving, and nothing else matters. Could you last a day on such rations? Yes, in the sense that your heart would still beat, but you would not emerge unchanged. Hunger here is not simply absence of food, it is a weapon, grinding you down, stealing your will, making you less human with every growl of your stomach. By the end of that day, you would not recognize yourself. You would be a creature of instinct, gnawing at scraps, begging for crumbs, willing to trade anything, dignity, loyalty, sanity, for one more bite. The water trough waits in the corner, a shallow basin carved from stone. At first glance, you might mistake it for a stagnant puddle, for its surface is thick with green slime. You crouch closer, hoping for clarity, but the smell rises before you even touch it. Stale, earthy, tinged with rot. The dungeon does not provide refreshment. It offers survival on its own cruel terms. Chroniclers from across Europe often mention the filth of prison water. Some cells had only a shared trough, refilled irregularly from nearby wells. Others relied on rainwater seeping through cracks in the ceiling. In both cases, contamination was inevitable. Archaeological studies of medieval wells near jails have revealed high levels of bacteria and traces of human waste, suggesting the water was as much poison as relief. Drinking it meant risking dysentery, fever, or worse. You dip your hand into the basin, and slime coats your skin like grease. You scoop the liquid carefully, but when you raise it to your lips, the taste is unbearable. Sour, mineral, thick. It scratches your throat as it goes down, leaving behind a lingering bitterness. Yet thirst overrides disgust. You drink again, each swallow a bargain with your body. You know you may sicken, but without water, you will collapse even faster. One peculiar note survives from a Spanish prison ledger. Jailers occasionally dropped herbs into the trough, rosemary or sage, not to improve the prisoner's health, but to mask the stench when nobles toured the dungeons. Imagine the irony of perfumed rot, a cosmetic layer over disease. It did little to purify, it only disguised. You hear the rats before you see them, their claws scratching as they approach. They drink freely from the same trough, their whiskers twitching, their bellies full. You swat at them weakly, but they return the moment you turn away. You realize you are sharing not only a prison but also a cup with vermin. The thought makes your stomach churn, but your thirst does not care. Historians disagree on how much water prisoners actually received. Some sources suggest a small ration was provided daily, measured and monitored. Others argue that captives were left to fend for themselves, scraping moisture from walls or catching raindrops through vents. The evidence remains divided, but all agree on one truth. Clean water was a luxury few ever tasted. You lean against the wall, stomach heavy with foul liquid. Soon cramps twist your gut, sharp and relentless. You groan softly, curling onto the straw, wishing you had resisted. But thirst is not patient. Even knowing the price, you will return to that trough again. The dungeon has no mercy. It makes you choose between thirst and sickness, and either way you lose. Odd tales emerge from these conditions. One prisoner claimed he trained himself to sip water only once every 2 days, tricking his body into believing it was enough. Another insisted he survived by licking condensation from the walls, though how long such a method could last is doubtful. A third spoke of melting snow carried in through cracks, savoring each drop like nectar. All these accounts share the same theme. Desperation turns water into obsession. You lie still, clutching your abdomen, feeling the liquid roil inside you. The cold stone beneath you offers no comfort. Your mouth remains dry despite the trough, your lips cracked, your tongue coated with a film of bitterness. You wonder if the sickness will kill you before the chains do. And yet, strangely, you feel a flicker of gratitude. Even filthy water prolongs you, keeps your heart beating another hour, another day. The dungeon does not want you dead too quickly. It wants you to linger, to decay slowly. In that sense, the trough is not a gift at all, it is part of the trap. Could you last a day with such water? Yes, but at a cost. By evening your stomach would cramp, your body fever with infection, your mind blur with dizziness. And tomorrow, when thirst rose again, you would drink once more. That is the final cruelty of the trough. It ensures you survive, but never in health. It makes you complicit in your own poisoning, one sip at a time. At first, you think the faint murmur is only another trick of stone, but then you catch the cadence of words. Someone is speaking. You press your ear against the wall, and the sound grows clearer, half-whispered phrases, broken by coughs, drifting through cracks in the masonry. A neighbor, another prisoner, chained just as you are, hidden by darkness, yet suddenly close enough to touch through sound. Medieval accounts tell us that isolation was rarely absolute. Stone walls carried voices far, and prisoners often developed strange companionships through whispers. In some chronicles from the Tower of London, captives reportedly tapped coded messages through walls, using patterns of knocks to spell out words. Others scratched marks, or passed notes hidden in food bowls. Human beings, deprived of everything else, sought connection even in the most fragile forms. You whisper back now, tentative, testing. For a moment there is silence. Then the reply comes soft, hurried, urgent. You cannot make out every word, but the tone is unmistakable. Relief. Two souls in despair, brushing against each other through stone. The voice grows clearer over time. A man, old, his speech broken by wheezes. He tells you fragments of stories, how long he has been here, how many others he has heard come and go. His words ramble, sometimes coherent, sometimes spiraling into nonsense. You suspect he has been here too long, his mind fraying under the weight of years. And yet, his presence comforts you. You are not alone. One curious anecdote from German prison records describes the wall friend, an unseen companion who spoke nightly through cracks. A prisoner wrote that he never saw the man's face, yet considered him closer than a brother. When the voice stopped one evening, replaced by silence, the prisoner grieved as though family had died. You understand this story now. In a place where time is meaningless, a whisper becomes lifeblood. Yet whispers carry their own terror. Sometimes the man mutters of horrors you cannot confirm, chains that dragged others into pits, screams that never ended, punishments you have not yet faced. Are these truths, or are they fevered inventions? You do not know, but the words lodge in your skull. You find yourself fearing punishments you had not imagined before, nightmares gifted to you by your unseen companion. Historians still argue whether such prisoner communications were encouraged or suppressed. Some say jailers tolerated them, knowing despair made captives docile. Others claim guards punished even whispers, fearing conspiracy. Archaeological digs have revealed holes bored crudely between adjoining cells, proof of desperate attempts at connection. The debate lingers, unresolved, but the fact remains: people will risk anything for a voice in the dark. The neighbor grows bolder. He tells you his name, though you are not sure it is real. He recounts his crime, treason, he claims, though he sounds more like a beggar who stole bread. His laugh is cracked, hollow, more sob than mirth. You laugh back anyway, because it feels like the only appropriate response. For a moment, you feel human again. But the dungeon corrupts even friendship. Later, the man mutters strange things, half prayers, half curses. He insists someone watches from the ceiling, that the rats whisper secrets, that the guards speak in code. You realize he is slipping into madness. Perhaps he already has. His whispers turn from comfort to contagion, planting doubts you cannot uproot. You cover your ears, but stone carries sound too well. His words curl into your mind whether you invite them or not. One peculiar tale survives from Florence. A prisoner claimed his neighbor taught him an entire song through the wall, verse by verse. When he was finally released, he sang it publicly, a testimony that even stone could not silence art. Yet another account tells of whispers that lured men into betrayal, false promises of escape, instructions to attack guards that led only to harsher punishment. The dungeon twists voices into both salvation and trap. You lie back, staring into the dark, listening as your neighbor hums tunelessly. The sound is shaky, off-key, but it vibrates in your chest like a lullaby. For a fleeting moment, you almost relax, but then the humming breaks into sobs, raw and uncontrolled, echoing into your own ribs. You feel tears sting your own eyes before you can stop them. His grief has become yours. Could you last a day with such a neighbor? Half companion, half curse? Perhaps. You would cling to his voice, desperate for proof of another soul. But by the end, his words would merge with your own fears, until you no longer knew which horrors were real and which were whispered into being. And in that blur, the dungeon would claim not just your body, but your mind. The drip above your head has become familiar, almost predictable, but tonight another rhythm joins it, a steady plink, plink plink, on the crown of your skull. At first you think it is coincidence, a leak angled badly, yet soon you realize the drops strike with uncanny precision, always in the same spot. Each impact is tiny, harmless in isolation, yet unbearable in repetition. Water counts the seconds for you, beating a cruel tattoo into your mind. Travelers in later centuries would sensationalize this idea, calling it the torture of the dripping water. Some insisted it could drive men insane within hours. Modern historians question whether such stories were exaggerated, but even skeptics admit the dungeon's environment could mimic the effect naturally. A single leak positioned directly above a captive might as well have been designed for torment. Whether deliberate or accidental, the result was the same: sleeplessness, exhaustion, unraveling. You tilt your head to the side, but the chains restrict you. The drip follows, splattering now against your temple instead. You shift again, curling forward, but the water strikes your neck. There is no escape. Each drop finds you like a hunter. It is not pain that unravels you, it is inevitability. You begin to dread, not the drip itself, but the waiting space between them. The anticipation grows heavier than the impact. A peculiar tale survives from a Venetian prison where one inmate claimed he counted over 20,000 drops on his forehead before he lost consciousness. Whether that number was truth or hallucination is impossible to know, but you understand why he counted. Numbering the drops is a desperate attempt to control them, to transform chaos into order. You try the same now, whispering numbers softly. 1, 2, 3. By 30, you've already lost track. The damp spreads outward from the point of impact, soaking into your hair, sliding cold trails down your scalp and neck. Your skin prunes, raw from constant wetness. Soon, the area aches not from force but from repetition, like a bruise deepening one tap at a time. You rub furiously, but friction cannot undo the damage. The dungeon has infinite patience. Scholars still dispute whether medieval jailers exploited leaks intentionally. Some suggest they simply left prisoners where water happened to fall. Others argue that positioning was deliberate, a cruel awareness that even the gentlest force, repeated endlessly, could break resolve. The debate continues, but as you sit here, the drip's precision feels too sharp to be accident. Oddly enough, one prisoner in France claimed he began to hear words in the rhythm of the drops, as though water itself were whispering commands. "Confess," he swore it said. "Confess, confess." The story may be embellished, yet you recognize the temptation. Already the plink seems to chant, shaping itself into syllables. You shake your head, but the sound clings. Perhaps you too will begin to hear voices soon. You grow desperate for distraction. You hum softly, trying to drown the drip in your own sound. But the water punctuates your song, splattering against each note until melody dissolves. You clench your teeth and bite your lip, trying to focus on the pain instead. The taste of blood fills your mouth, metallic and sharp. For a moment it helps, but when you swallow, the drip returns, steady, merciless. The dungeon does not need whips or blades. It has time. One drop, then another, then another. Hours pass and you feel your mind blur. You forget when the drip began. You cannot imagine it ending. You think of it following you even in freedom, a phantom tapping at your skull forever. One odd anecdote from a later prison describes men begging to be moved to filthier, colder cells, simply to escape a constant leak. They preferred vermin and stench over the sound of water. That choice makes sense now. You too would trade anything: comfort, food, dignity, just to silence the endless plinking. Could you last a day like this? Your body might, yes, but your mind would scatter like leaves in wind. By the end, you would beg for mercy not from chains or hunger, but from water, ordinary water, transformed into an executioner by patience. And in that moment, you would understand the dungeon's greatest cruelty. It does not need to act quickly. It can wait, drop by drop, until you are undone. The air thickens until every breath feels like smoke. You cough, and the sound bounces back at you, raw and sharp, as though the walls themselves are mocking your lungs. The torch, a guard left burning outside your cell, should have been a gift of light, but instead it poisons the air, its smoke curling downward into your chamber. The dungeon has no chimney, no draft to sweep fumes away. The fire consumes oxygen greedily, leaving behind choking clouds that scratch your throat and sting your eyes. Written descriptions from medieval chroniclers confirm how poor ventilation plagued underground cells. Fires set for light or heat filled the air with soot, and prisoners often fainted before the torches burned out. In some jails, the smoke was deliberate, part of a calculated cruelty. Captives were forced to inhale it as an interrogation tactic. A German record even notes prisoners gasping as fish pulled from water when smoke from pitch torches was allowed to gather thickly. You feel it now, your chest tightening, each inhale harsher than the last. Your eyes water until the world blurs, though there is little to see. You blink furiously, but tears stream anyway, cutting warm tracks down your grime-covered cheeks. Your mouth tastes of ash, every word you might whisper coated in grit. A curious anecdote survives from Naples. One prisoner claimed he could trace patterns in the smoke like visions, seeing saints or demons swirling before him. Some believe these were hallucinations, products of oxygen deprivation. Yet the story rings true. Already shapes flicker at the corners of your sight faces, forming, then dissolving in the haze. You know they are illusions, but they unsettle you all the same. The debate among historians lingers. Did jailers understand the dangers of smoke, or did they treat it as a necessary inconvenience? Some argue guards simply didn't care. Light was needed, and the prisoner's discomfort was irrelevant. Others suggest smoke was valued as a cheap form of coercion, a way to soften captives before harsher punishments. Either way, the result remains: lungs filling with soot, minds unraveling in haze. You pull your tunic over your nose, hoping to filter the air, but the fabric is damp and mouldy. Instead of comfort, it brings only another stench, layered atop the acrid fumes. Your throat burns, and you cough harder, body convulsing with each spasm. You slump to the floor, head spinning, aware that the smoke is stealing oxygen drop by drop. The oddest part is how quickly you grow drowsy. At first you panic, clawing for breath, but soon fatigue spreads through you, heavy and irresistible. You know it is not true sleep but suffocation, yet your body craves it. You slump sideways into the straw, half conscious, mind drifting in and out. You wonder if perhaps it would be easier to stop resisting, to let the haze swallow you whole. But the dungeon is not done yet. The torch outside sputters, then flares, sending a fresh wave of smoke rolling in. You jolt awake, coughing violently, ribs aching from the force. Your head pounds. The air feels thicker than cloth, pressing against you, filling every crevice. You claw weakly at the wall, as though stone could give you air. One peculiar account tells of a prisoner who carved a tiny hole in his door with a spoon, just wide enough for fresh air. He claimed that hole saved his life. When archaeologists uncovered the cell centuries later, they found the marks still there, evidence of desperation chiseled into wood. You wish for such a hole now. You would give anything for one gasp of clean air. You crawl to the trough, splashing water on your face, but the relief is brief. The smoke clings, an invisible shroud. It scratches deeper each time you breathe. You imagine your lungs blackening, your breath shortening, your life measured out not in days but in gasps. Could you last a day in such fumes? Perhaps your body would survive, coughing and retching, but your mind would not. By evening you would drift in and out of hallucinations, unsure if the shadows were smoke or spirits. Your lungs would ache for days after, scarred by soot. And in the dungeon's logic, that is the point. Not to kill you quickly, but to choke you slowly, until even the air you breathe is an enemy. The smoke finally drifts away, but in the silence that follows, you overhear hushed voices. Prisoners further down the corridor whisper rumors of darker fates, pits with no doors, shafts that drop into oblivion, oubliettes. The word itself comes from the French oublier, to forget. These were not just cells but holes designed for erasure. Once lowered in, a captive was meant never to emerge again. Descriptions of oubliettes vary. Some were narrow wells, barely wide enough for a body, into which prisoners were dropped and abandoned. Others were bottle-shaped chambers, wider at the bottom so escape was impossible. Archaeologists have identified such pits beneath castles in France and Britain, some still littered with bones. Whether they were always prisons or sometimes storage pits remains debated, but their reputation in folklore is unmistakable. The place where people were discarded like rubbish. You imagine the descent, a rope around your waist, a torch flickering above, stone walls closing tighter as you sink. Then the rope is released, and you fall the last few feet into darkness. The sound of the cover slamming shut rings louder than any scream. From that moment on, there is nothing, no door, no key, no guard even pretending you exist. One peculiar account from a Burgundian dungeon tells of captives fed through a narrow shaft, scraps of bread dropped like offerings into a well. Sometimes the food landed in filth before being eaten. Other times it never reached the prisoner at all, leaving them to starve surrounded by rotten crumbs. The sheer indignity of it is worse than hunger itself, being reduced to a begging animal, waiting for food to fall from above. Historians still dispute how often oubliettes were truly used. Some argue they were rare, exaggerated by later storytellers to darken the image of medieval justice. Others point to undeniable remains, human bones found at the bottoms of sealed shafts as evidence they were indeed employed. The truth likely lies in between. Not every castle had them, but those that did wielded them as symbols of absolute power. You close your eyes and picture yourself inside one. The walls are slick with damp, your shoulders scraping stone if you try to move. You cannot stretch, cannot lie down, can barely sit. Hours blur into torture. Your legs cramp until they no longer obey you. You slump sideways, but the floor is wet, slimy, jagged. There is no position of comfort, no posture that relieves the pressure. A strange story is told of a prisoner who survived weeks in an oubliette by catching insects and drinking condensation. He supposedly scratched prayers into the walls with his fingernails until they bled. When his body was later found, the walls bore no marks at all. Perhaps he imagined them, hallucinating under hunger and thirst. That is the cruelest truth. In a place designed for forgetting, even your own testimony may vanish. You try to imagine what it would sound like, the silence absolute, broken only by your own breathing. Occasionally, a faint echo of life above might reach you. Boots, voices, laughter. But the shaft twists the sound, making it ghostly, distorted, as though mocking you. You would shout, of course, but your voice would not carry far, and eventually you would stop. Archaeologists crawling into one oubliette in Loch's castle found the floor still lined with straw, preserved by centuries of damp. Among it lay fragments of cloth, rotted leather, even a wooden spoon. The artifacts whisper of lives once trapped, forgotten until their bodies turned to dust. To stand above such a pit is chilling enough. To be inside, it would be despair perfected. You wonder which is worse, to die quickly in chains, seen by others, or to vanish in silence, buried alive in stone. The dungeon's cruelty lies not only in pain but in choice, or rather, in stripping choice away. An oubliette offers no struggle, no fight, no resistance, only waiting. Could you last a day in such a place? Perhaps, if water dripped and crumbs fell, but by the end of that day, your body would cramp, your throat burn, your mind spiral, and you would know with certainty that no one remembered you. That knowledge would crush harder than hunger, harder than cold. That is why the oubliette lingers in memory, not because all dungeons had them, but because the idea of being erased is the most terrifying punishment of all. When the echoes fade, you discover a sound far more terrifying than screams: silence. At first it seems like a blessing, a reprieve from the coughs and mutters and footsteps. But silence here is not peace, it is absence, heavy and suffocating, pressing down on your chest until you feel you might burst. In that stillness, your own heartbeat becomes deafening, your own breathing monstrous. Medieval prisoners wrote about this peculiar torture. Some described silence as a second darkness, a void that swallowed not only sound but hope. One account from a 15th century Italian cell recounts a man who begged guards to leave a torch burning, or at least to speak a single word when they brought food, because the silence between visits made him believe the world above no longer existed. You understand him now. The dungeon devours sound until even your smallest movements echo grotesquely. When you shift, straw rustles like thunder. When you cough, it reverberates as if 10 men coughed with you. You speak aloud, softly, just to hear a voice, but the echo returns, distorted, stretched thin by stone. It sounds less like you and more like someone else answering faintly from the dark. One peculiar note survives from a French chronicle. Prisoners sometimes deliberately made noise, tapping cups, humming tunes, drumming chains, simply to reassure themselves they were still alive. The guards punished them for it, interpreting the sounds as rebellion. Yet the captives continued anyway, for in silence, madness grows. And madness whispers now in your ears. At first you imagine faint murmurs, distant and indistinct. Perhaps it is your neighbor again, whispering through walls. But no, the whispers rise and fall without rhythm, shapeless as wind. You realize they are inventions of your own mind, filling the void. The silence is so complete that your brain manufactures sound rather than endure absence. Scholars continue to debate whether silence was accidental or intentional in dungeon design. Some argue that thick stone walls simply insulated noise. Others maintain that jailers enforced quiet as a form of control, forbidding prisoners to speak or sing. Whatever the reason, silence itself became a weapon, one that required no chains or whips. Oddly enough, there are stories of captives who found strange comfort in it. One English noble wrote that he learned to pray silently in rhythm with his breath, finding in the quiet a kind of meditation. Perhaps he was stronger than most, or perhaps he was lying, dressing up despair as devotion. For most, silence did not soothe, it devoured. You try to steady yourself, inhaling deeply, exhaling slowly, but the silence only magnifies the sound of your lungs. Each breath grows louder in your awareness, until you imagine the entire dungeon pulsing with it. You place a hand over your chest, certain the thumping of your heart must be audible to others. Yet no answer comes, only silence, endless, unbroken. The stillness stretches time. Without sound to measure moments, hours dissolve. You cannot tell if minutes have passed or days. You begin to count your breaths again, but quickly lose track. You slap the wall, desperate for noise, but the echo fades too quickly, and then silence returns, heavier than before, as though mocking your attempt to break it. A curious anecdote survives from Prague. A prisoner reportedly tore his own clothes into strips and knotted them, shaking them to make rustling sounds, just to endure the quiet. When the guards discovered him, they laughed and took the strips away, leaving him in sobbing silence. You imagine his despair and realize you share it. You would do anything for sound, any sound at all. Finally, you hear it, a faint scuttle of rats in the corner. Relief floods you, absurd and desperate. Vermin you once despised now become salvation, their tiny claws proof that life still exists around you. You whisper thanks to them, though they do not hear. Their noise anchors you in reality. Could you last a day like this, trapped in silence? Perhaps your body would survive, but your mind would fray into threads. By evening, whispers would echo in your skull. Your own voice would sound alien, and silence itself would feel like a predator stalking you. And when the day ended, you would beg for screams, for footsteps, for anything, anything but this terrible void. Your body aches, your stomach twists, but worst of all is the gnawing pull of exhaustion. You have not truly slept since you were dragged into this pit. Each attempt collapses beneath cold, hunger, smoke, or dripping water. Now your eyelids sag, heavy as iron, but every time you drift toward unconsciousness, something jolts you awake. A cough, a rat's skitter, your own shiver. Sleep itself has become a battlefield. Historical accounts from medieval jails note that deprivation of rest was one of the most common torments. Not always deliberate, though sometimes it was. Cells were designed with discomfort built into them. No bed, no blanket, no silence, no warmth. A chronicler in Paris wrote that a man may live long without bread, but none may live long without sleep. He was not exaggerating. Modern medicine confirms that after even one night of wakefulness, the mind begins to falter, inventing phantoms to fill the void. You feel that faltering now. Your head nods, then jerks up violently when your body twitches. Your neck aches from the whiplash. You slump sideways into straw, but itching drives you up again. The drip of water taps your skull until you curse aloud. You try sitting, leaning against the wall, knees bent, but the stone is unyielding, pressing bruises into your spine. There is no position, no posture, no angle that offers release. A peculiar story survives from Florence. Prisoners chained standing were left awake for days, unable to lie down. Some collapsed, only to be yanked upright again by shackles. Whether intentional or simply the byproduct of cruel architecture, the result was the same sleep stolen hour by hour. You can imagine the agony now, for even free to shift, you cannot find comfort enough to rest. And with wakefulness comes confusion. At first it is small. You lose track of whether a sound was real or imagined. Then it grows. You think you see light flicker on the wall, though no torch burns nearby. You hear your name whispered, though no one is there. You begin to dream with your eyes open, fragments of memory blurring into hallucination. A feast spreads before you, bread and meat steaming. You reach for it, only to grasp empty air. The dungeon laughs silently at your disappointment. Scholars debate whether sleep deprivation was a conscious method of interrogation in the Middle Ages, or merely an accidental consequence of poor conditions. Some suggest that guards deliberately rattled chains, shouted, or beat doors to keep captives awake before questioning. Others argue that natural discomfort alone was enough, no need for further effort. The disagreement continues. But here in your body, the debate feels irrelevant. Intentional or not, the deprivation works. You are unraveling. Oddly, one prisoner's letter from 16th century Spain describes embracing wakefulness, claiming he prayed without ceasing, turning each sleepless night into vigil. Perhaps he clung to faith as a shield. Perhaps he had already slipped into delirium. You try whispering a prayer yourself, but the words tangle on your dry tongue. Even sacred syllables stumble when the mind is frayed. You curl again into a ball, covering your ears, shutting your eyes, but your heart pounds too loudly, echoing inside your skull like a drum. The straw scratches, the stone bites, the air chills. You flip to your other side, but discomfort follows. Time stretches mercilessly. Minutes feel like hours. Hours feel like eternities. Then comes the terror of microsleep. Your body snatches seconds of unconsciousness without your consent. You jerk awake, certain you've been asleep for hours, only to realize mere moments passed. Each time it happens, you are disoriented, gasping, unsure whether you dreamed or hallucinated. Rats creep closer during these lapses, emboldened by your stillness. One brushes your foot, and you scream yourself awake again. The strangest anecdote from English records tells of a prisoner who claimed he spoke with angels during sleepless nights, their voices comforting him until dawn. Others dismissed him as mad, yet his account survives. Perhaps he truly did hear voices, or perhaps exhaustion made him believe he had. Either way, his story illustrates the thin line between revelation and delirium when sleep is denied. You rub your eyes, but the grit of exhaustion remains. Your lids flutter, your body begs, but rest will not come. And in this dungeon, fatigue is not just discomfort, it is destruction. Muscles weaken, thoughts fracture, memory collapses. You are less yourself with each hour, reduced to trembling flesh that cannot think, cannot plan, cannot even dream properly. Could you last a day like this? Denied sleep, tormented by every element around you? Your body might stagger forward, clinging to instinct, but by the end of that day, your mind would no longer be yours. You would babble nonsense, reach for visions, lose track of who you were. And in that, the dungeon would win, breaking you not with chains or lashes, but with the simple theft of rest. Your body finally slumps into a shallow doze, but sleep brings no comfort. Instead, nightmares bloom instantly, vivid and suffocating. You dream you are free, walking across sunlit fields, the smell of bread and grass in the air. Then the vision collapses. Chains yank your arms back. The field melts into stone, and you wake gasping in darkness. The dungeon follows you into dreams, reminding you there is no escape, not even in your own mind. Contemporary accounts tell us that prisoners often spoke of nightmares more terrifying than waking life. A 15th century letter from a French captive mentions visions of fire and teeth that haunted him nightly. Others described endless dreams of falling, of drowning, of suffocating under stone. Without sunlight to anchor their minds, captives drifted into fevered dreams that blurred with hallucinations. Sleep, when it came, was no relief at all. You rub your eyes, trying to shake the dream, but the images cling. You swear you still hear the snap of chains, the thud of boots, the hiss of torches, even though you are awake. The dungeon blurs the line between nightmare and memory, twisting both into a single torment. One peculiar detail from a German chronicle describes a prisoner who carved his dreams into the wall each morning, fearing he would forget them otherwise. Strange faces, towers of fire, animals with human eyes, his carvings remain today, etched testimony of a mind unraveling. You wonder if he believed recording them would protect him, or if it was only another symptom of madness. Scholars still debate whether nightmares were caused mostly by physical conditions, hunger, damp, exhaustion, or by psychological trauma. Some argue that malnutrition alone triggers hallucinatory dreams. Others insist that the sheer stress of imprisonment warped the subconscious. The truth likely lies in both, body and mind, conspiring to torment their owner. Your head nods again, and another dream surges. This time you are back in your childhood home, sitting by a hearth, warmth on your cheeks. You reach for bread on the table, but when you bite, it turns to ash. You cough and choke, only to jolt awake once more, throat burning from the dungeon's damp air. The disappointment is almost worse than the nightmare itself. Oddly enough, some prisoners found strength in dreams. One Italian account tells of a man who dreamed nightly of his wife, her voice guiding him through darkness. He claimed those visions sustained him, keeping him sane until release. Was he comforted or deluded? Perhaps both. But the story reveals the strange duality of dreams. They can destroy or preserve. You try to cling to better visions. You close your eyes deliberately, summoning a meadow, a river, a summer sky. For a few breaths, it works. You see green, blue, gold. But then the images darken, clouds roll in, water rises, and chains slip over your wrists again. Even imagination betrays you. The dungeon stains every thought. The worst dream comes when you believe it real. You open your eyes in sleep and see the dungeon exactly as it is. The walls, the straw, the chains. You think you are awake, until something impossible happens. The walls begin to breathe, or shadows detach and walk toward you. You scream, but your voice is muffled. Then you wake fully, realizing it was another dream layered on reality. These false awakenings leave you dizzy, unable to trust even your senses. Historians note that such layered nightmares are common under extreme duress. Sleep cycles fragment, blending waking and dreaming. Captives cannot tell whether they hallucinate or dream. This uncertainty itself becomes a form of torture, breaking confidence in the one refuge left, the mind. You curl tighter, wishing you could stay awake, but exhaustion wins. Again and again you drift, each time pulled into darker visions. You dream of pits filled with bones, of rats gnawing at your hands, of faceless guards staring silently. Each dream leaves its trace even after you wake, clinging to you like cobwebs. Could you last a day with such nightmares? Your body might, but your sanity would not. By evening you would dread closing your eyes more than you dread staying awake. Rest would no longer be rest, it would be another dungeon layered inside the first. And in that recursive prison, sleep itself would betray you, turning each hour into both torment and trap. You sit hunched in the dark, ribs aching from shallow breaths, when a sound rattles from the far corridor, a groaning creak of wood, followed by a metallic scrape. The noise prickles your skin. This is not the rhythm of boots or the jangle of keys. It is the sound of something being turned, wound, prepared. Rumor told you of such devices, and now your mind fills the blanks. The rack. Contemporary chronicles describe it with cruel clarity. A wooden frame, larger than a bed, with rollers at each end. The prisoner is bound by wrists and ankles, and the rollers twisted until the body stretches beyond its limits. At first, joints strain. Then they snap. Muscles tear. Sinews scream. Bones sometimes dislocate entirely. It was not always meant to kill. It was meant to maim, to extract confession, to turn strength into weakness. You imagine being dragged onto that frame, ropes rough against your skin. The roller creaks as the handle turns, slowly at first. Your arms extend, shoulders aching. Another turn, and your legs burn, hips wrenching from their sockets. The dungeon air fills with your own groans, and still the handle turns. One peculiar note survives from an English record. The rackmaster sometimes stopped mid-turn, loosening the ropes briefly before tightening again. The sudden rush of blood into tortured limbs was described as agony nearly equal to the stretching itself. To give back comfort only to snatch it away, this was part of the cruelty. Scholars still dispute how common the rack truly was. Some argue it was a rare tool, reserved for political prisoners or those accused of treason. Others claim it was a staple of major jails across Europe, a mechanical witness to countless confessions. Archaeological remains of rack frames in castles lend some weight, but written sources may exaggerate for effect. Yet whether rare or frequent, the fear it inspired spread far. You listen to the creak again, distant but distinct. Perhaps no one is being tortured now. Perhaps the device only shifts in its age, wood swelling in the damp. Still, the noise has already done its work. You imagine it too vividly. You feel your joints tingle as though anticipating separation. Even safe in your cell, you wince as though the rope has tightened already. A curious story from Spain tells of a man who claimed he grew taller after his session on the rack. His body stretched permanently. He joked bitterly that he had at least gained stature, though he limped forever after. Dark humor, perhaps, but you hear the kernel of truth. The device not only tore bodies but reshaped them grotesquely. You curl tighter, pulling your knees to your chest, as if to protect your joints. The thought of being unspooled like a rope terrifies you more than hunger or cold. At least those are familiar. The rack threatens to dismantle you piece by piece until you are not yourself at all. The debate among modern historians remains unresolved. Did the rack produce real confessions, or only desperate lies? Some argue its victims said anything to stop the pain, making it useless for truth. Others note that authorities valued submission more than accuracy. Either way, the device succeeded in its true purpose: control. The creak echoes once more, and you cannot help but imagine screams following it. You cover your ears, but the sound has already embedded in your mind. You picture bones splintering, tendons snapping, voices rising into shrieks. You try to remind yourself that perhaps no such thing is happening now, yet fear does not need confirmation. Fear thrives in imagination. One odd tale survives from a prisoner who claimed he laughed uncontrollably on the rack, his mind snapping under pressure. Guards interpreted his laughter as madness and stopped the session. He survived, though broken. The story lingers as proof that the rack did not only torment flesh, it twisted the soul. Could you last a day in a dungeon where such sounds haunted the corridors? Perhaps your body would remain untouched, but your mind would stretch like rope, snapping under fear alone. By nightfall, you would feel the rack in your own joints, even if you never touched its frame. That is its legacy. It tortures even those who only hear of it, echoing in imagination until all strength unravels. The echo of the rack fades, but the dungeon has other voices. Somewhere beyond your door comes the dull thud of boots, followed by a shriek unlike any you've yet heard. It is sharper, more piercing, not the drawn-out groan of stretching joints, but the sudden cry of fire touching flesh. The smell follows soon after, acrid, oily, unmistakable. Someone is being burned. Medieval punishments often turned flame into a weapon. Torches pressed against skin left blisters in seconds. Iron pokers, heated until they glowed red, were applied to feet, arms, or chest. Branding was also common, letters scorched into flesh to mark a thief, a heretic, or a rebel. Records from Paris and London both speak of men released from cells carrying these scars, permanent reminders of shame. Fire did not just burn bodies, it branded identities. You imagine the scene: a prisoner bound upright, eyes wide, watching as the iron glows brighter in the brazier. The guard lifts it slowly, deliberately, letting anticipation work its torture before the heat even touches skin. Then the hiss sharp, vicious as flesh sears. The scream rises higher, echoing through the corridor, and you clutch your ears, though it does nothing to block the sound. One peculiar note from a German chronicle describes how jailers sometimes used wax candles, dripping hot wax drop by drop onto captives. Compared to the branding iron, it might seem minor, but over hours the pain was relentless. The chronicler added dryly, "The candle was cheaper than rope." The detail strikes you as both absurd and chilling economy, shaping cruelty. Scholars debate how widely fire was used inside dungeons. Some argue that tales of glowing irons are exaggerated, meant to frighten more than record. Others point to inventories listing braziers, tongs, and brands stored alongside chains. Archaeological finds of scorched stone near certain prison walls hint that flames licked there often. The evidence is mixed, but the terror is certain. The smell intensifies in your imagination, and suddenly you feel phantom burns on your own skin. Your arm tingles as though heat has brushed it, though the air is cold. You rub the spot furiously, but the sensation lingers. You begin to wonder whether pain can travel through stone, carried in sound and smell until it becomes your own. A curious story survives from Naples. A prisoner claimed he welcomed the brand because it at least proved he still existed. His scorched letter was his name when jailers refused to speak it. He bore it proudly even after release, calling it both curse and identity. You shudder at the thought, yet you understand better to be marked than to be forgotten entirely. The cry outside fades into sobbing, then silence. You do not know if the victim fainted or died, but the smell lingers, heavy, oily, clinging to your nose until you gag. You press your sleeve to your face, but the cloth already stinks of mildew. Fire overlays filth, creating a stench uniquely dungeon-like, rot and smoke woven together. Historians still argue whether branding was punishment or interrogation. Some claim it was symbolic, a public mark for those later paraded outside. Others insist it was used to break will before confession. In truth, both could be true, and neither comforts you now, because in the dungeon, even rumor of flame is enough to unravel resolve. Oddly enough, there are accounts of prisoners laughing after branding, hysteria breaking loose once pain peaked. One scribe noted that they did not laugh with joy, but with madness, as men already lost. The image chills you. You imagine yourself laughing, high and broken, as smoke rises from your own flesh. You cannot decide which would be worse, silence or that hollow laughter. You curl into yourself, clutching your arms, whispering reassurances that you are not at the brazier, not today. But the mind does not care for logic. It fills the void with images until you feel the burns anyway. For that is the fire's true power, not only to scar skin, but to haunt those who only hear it. Could you last a day with flames licking the dungeon air? Your body might survive untouched, but your nerves would smoulder all the same. By nightfall you would carry phantom burns across your arms, chest, face, and when you closed your eyes, you would see the iron glow again, waiting, always waiting. That is the cruelty of fire in the dungeon. It burns even those it never touches. The fire's echo still clings to your nostrils, acrid and oily, but soon another sound replaces it, the dull clank of buckets, the slosh of water, the hurried shuffle of boots. At first you hope it means cleaning, some scrap of mercy. Then the truth hits you as cold liquid rushes across the floor, soaking your straw in an instant. The dungeon is flooding. Not every cell in the Middle Ages was designed to drown captives, but many were built in low places where water seeped naturally. Chroniclers describe jails in France and Italy where rainstorms swelled rivers until water poured through cracks, filling cells ankle deep, sometimes higher. In one English prison records note, prisoners drowned for want of drainage during a flood. The dungeon itself became executioner, its stone belly filling with icy water. You scramble upright, shackles clinking as the tide rises around your feet. The chill is unbearable, piercing sharper than air alone. It soaks instantly through your thin clothes, cling like ice to your skin. Each step squelches, straw floating away in soggy clumps. The floor vanishes beneath murky ripples, and you stumble, terrified of pits or holes hidden beneath. A peculiar account from Burgundy claims that some cells were intentionally flooded to waist height, forcing captives to stand sleepless through the night. Prisoners fainted from exhaustion, only to wake choking as their faces slipped below the surface. Was this exaggeration or grim truth? Historians still argue. Some dismiss it as legend. Others point to archaeological finds of drains and sluices in dungeon floors. Whatever the case, the imagery survives because it terrifies. The water climbs to your shins, each wave colder than the last. You hug the wall for balance, teeth chattering uncontrollably. Rats swim gleefully past, more comfortable than you, their slick bodies cutting through the black surface. One brushes your leg, and you yelp, nearly slipping. You clutch the wall tighter, nails scraping stone. The stench intensifies. The flood stirs filth from every corner. Rot, waste, mold all mixing into a stew that coats the air. Gag, but there is nowhere to escape. The water presses in from all sides, turning your cell into a foul cauldron. You know disease lurks in every drop. Dysentery, fever, death creeping with each swallow of air. One curious prisoner account tells of carving tally marks high on the wall to measure the flood's rise, desperate to see whether it would stop. He claimed the water reached his chest before receding, leaving him alive but broken. Others were not so fortunate. Bones found in castle wells suggest some captives never resurfaced. You stand tiptoe now, chains rattling, as the flood climbs higher. Panic thrashes through you. You imagine yourself floating lifeless, face down, shackles dragging you deeper. Your breath quickens, chest heaving, each gulp of air sharp with mold and fear. You pray for the water to halt, but prayers echo uselessly against stone. Historians debate whether flooding was always accidental. Some argue many dungeons simply lay too low, their builders careless. Others suspect intentional design, pointing to records of sluices used in sieges to drown intruders and sometimes prisoners. The truth likely shifts from cell to cell. Yet when icy water grips your waist, the question of intention feels meaningless. Malice or neglect, the effect is the same. Oddly, one tale survives of a man who survived weeks in a flooded cell by building a floating mat from rotting straw, pushing it around like a raft. He claimed the rats climbed aboard with him, his unwilling companions. When he was released, he swore he still felt waves under his feet for the rest of his life. Your legs ache from standing rigid, your teeth chatter